Chapter 22:18. With pride on their faces, the two sword chiefs scanned the hundreds of thousands of young warriors below. At this moment, they were indeed proud of the sword sect. It was precisely because the sword sect was powerful enough that the two sword sect chiefs could receive the respect of so many people. One of the white-haired old men cleared his throat and slowly spoke. With the support of spiritual energy, his voice was transmitted into the ears of everyone present. On behalf of the sword sect and the sect master, this old man welcomes everyone to participate in this recruitment competition. At the same time, I hope that everyone will be able to move forward courageously. The first round of the competition will begin. Without further ado, the two of them opened the entrance to the 10,000 demons plain at the same time. As soon as the old man finished speaking, a door of light slowly appeared in front of everyone. This was the entrance to the demons plain. After the entrance opened, the white-haired old man spoke again. The first round of the competition will last for 7 days. After 7 days, everyone will be restrained and sent out of the demons plain. During this period, the sword sect will not interfere with anything that happens within the demons plain. Therefore, the first round of the competition is life-threatening. If anyone wishes to withdraw, you may leave now. Think about it carefully. The entrance to the demons plain will be closed in 2 hours. The first round of the competition was indeed life-threatening. Or rather, other than the third round, the first and second round of the competition were all life-threatening. This point required the young martial artists to weigh the pros and cons. If there were some who cherished their lives, then they could choose to leave and not participate in the recruitment competition. The Sword's Gate would not force them either. However, after hearing the white-haired old man's words, many young warriors present did not choose to withdraw. They were all warriors, so naturally, there would not be too many people who were afraid of death. This was because everyone knew that since they had stepped onto the martial path, they could only move forward courageously. Otherwise, they would only be annihilated by the masses. Especially for these young warriors, they had the spirit of newborn calves who were not afraid of tigers. Everyone had a dream in their hearts. They all dreamed of one day becoming a giant like the sword sect master, Shao Qin, standing at the peak of the great thousand world and overlooking the world. Thus, under the momentum of their dreams, many young warriors quickly swarmed towards the demons' plain. In everyone's opinion, joining the sword sect was a step for them. If they could become a disciple of the sword sect, it might be enough to change their lives. Seeing that not many people chose to withdraw, the two sword chiefs in the sky revealed a faint smile. One of them spoke faintly. "Elder Lin, have you seen any good seedlings?" "There are a few, but we can't say for sure in the end. After all, this is only the first round of the competition." "That's true. However, I've heard that Lord Sect Master is placing great importance on this recruitment competition. You and I can't mess it up." "That's for sure. This old man naturally won't disappoint the Sect Master and Vice Sect Master Lin Qing's trust." After many young warriors entered the demons' plain, some of the experts from the large clans took the initiative to visit the two-sword chief. There was no lack of Dao realm experts among them. However, although they were both Dao realm experts, their identities were completely different. The sword chiefs of the sword sect were enough to make any Dao realm experts not dare to offend them. In the face of these experts from the large clans, the two sword chiefs were very calm. The white-haired elder who spoke earlier also spoke faintly. "Everyone, it is indeed inconvenient for the two of us during the grand competition. I hope that everyone can understand. As for the outcome of the grand competition, everything will depend on the final token. Everyone, please be patient and wait for the results." Some of the experts from the large clans wanted to get close to the two-sword chief. They even wanted to bribe the two-sword chiefs to ensure that their juniors could pass the first round of the competition. Unfortunately, the two-sword chiefs did not buy it. Naturally, the two of them did not dare to secretly manipulate the results of the first round of the competition. It should be known that not only Lin Qing, but even Xiao Chun placed great importance on this competition. If anyone dared to do anything in the competition, they would undoubtedly be courting death. After speaking, the two sword chiefs left. Although the experts from the large clans felt that it was a pity, they did not dare to say anything. They could only resentfully disperse and wait for the results of the first round of the competition. Many young warriors entered the Demon's Plain. For a moment, the Demon's Plain was bustling with noise and excitement. However, no one knew that when they entered the Demon's Plain, Xiao Chen, Qin Shuru, and Long Qing, who were in the sword sect, were paying attention to the situation in the Demon's Plain. To be precise, Xiao Chen and the others were paying attention to Xiao Luan's situation. That's right, Xiao Luan's figure was mixed in with the crowd of young warriors. Xiao Luan also participated in this competition. This was also her own request. As she grew older, Xiao Luan no longer looked like a 7- or 8-year-old child. Instead, she had grown into a 16- or 17-year-old girl. Her appearance was fresh and beautiful. Her appearance was not inferior to her mother, Qin Shuru, and the others. As Xiao Chen's daughter, Xiao Luan actually did not need to participate in this competition. However, Xiao Luan said that even though she was her father's daughter, she wanted to be like the others and start from the most ordinary sword sect disciple. She did not want to always rely on her father, Xiao Chen. Qin Shuru and the other girls were worried about Xiao Chen's decision. However, Xiao Chen was very supportive of it. It could even be said that Xiao Chen was very pleased that Xiao Luan had such thoughts. At this moment, Xiao Luan was mixed in with the crowd on the light mirror. She had just passed through the entrance and was heading towards the depths of the myriad demons' plain alone. Qin Shuru and the other girls had long treated Xiao Luan as their own daughter. Among them, Gu Lingyao could not help but ask as she looked at Xiao Luan's back. "Husband, have you checked all the demonic beasts in the myriad demons' plain? There are no existences above the immortal Emperor realm, right? We can't let our guard down." The girls had asked this question many times. As this matter concerned Xiao Luan, they were naturally very attentive. They even personally went to Lin Qing and asked him to ensure that there were no demonic beasts above the immortal Emperor realm in the myriad demons' plain. After hearing Gu Lingyao's words, Xiao Chen helplessly smiled and said, "We have already checked countless times. Don't worry, Luan is not as weak as you think." He did not know whether to laugh or cry. However, after hearing Xiao Chen's words, Tian Yu directly said, "As her father, of course you don't have to worry. I have never seen you showing concern for Luan. Let me tell you, if Luan is in any danger, even if it means breaking the rules, I will intervene. Don't stop me at that time. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation." End of chapter. Chapter 22:19. Qin Shuru and the others doted on Luan to the extreme. Just as Tian Yu finished speaking, Xiao Qing and Bai Ruyue also strode into the courtyard. Bai Ruyue came to Xiao Chen's side and complained unhappily, "Chen, how can you let Luan go to the demon's plain? What if something happens?" Obviously, Bai Ruyue had heard that Xiao Luan was participating in the recruitment competition and came over to ask about it. Faced with his mother's complaint, Xiao Chen looked helplessly at his father, Xiao Qing. However, Xiao Qing also had a helpless expression on his face. There was no other way. Xiao Chen couldn't bring out his dignity as the sect master of the sword sect in front of his parents. He stood up and gave his seat to Bai Ruyue. Then, he massaged Bai Ruyue's shoulders and said softly, "Mother, don't worry. Mother, don't worry. Luan is not as weak as you think. Nothing will happen to her." "You think nothing will happen just because you say so? Chener, let me tell you. If anything happens to Luan, I won't let you off." Bai Ruyue had an expression that said, "I'll teach you a lesson." Seeing this, Xiao Chen nodded in agreement. Xiao Chen already knew that Bai Ruyue doted on Luan. However, He didn't expect that so many things would happen just because Luan signed up for the recruitment competition. Bai Ruiyue was clearly anxious. In the end, even Qin Shuru and the others comforted her. They even pointed out Luan's location in the light mirror to Bai Ruiyue. Bai Ruiyue was slightly relieved when she saw Luan through the light mirror. However, due to the worry in her heart, Bai Ruiyue didn't go. She wanted to stay here and watch Luan until the end of the first round of assessment. No matter what Xiao Chen said, Bai Ruiyue refused to listen. In the end, Xiao Chen had no choice but to accept his fate. Everyone stared at the light mirror, afraid that Luan would be in danger. In this regard, Xiao Chen and Xiao Qing were helpless. They could only go to the side and drink by themselves. Xiao Qing could understand Xiao Chen. However, as women, Bai Ruiyue and the others obviously couldn't. They didn't care about anything else, and only cared about Luan's safety. Moreover, in the eyes of women like Bai Ruiyue, since Xiao was the sect master of the sword sect, there was no need for Luan didn't need to participate in the recruitment competition. Luan didn't have nothing better to do. Luan was. Luan be a useless trash, only rely on herself. Was only relied on herself. Was. Luan was a trash to who was. Was Luan was in was Luan s was in s's. Was Luan was the Luan was Luan be. Therefore, when Luan proposed to participate in the recruitment competition, Xiao Chen was in favor of it. He didn't even tell Lin Qing so that Luan wouldn't receive any preferential treatment. He hoped that Luan would be able to complete the recruitment competition with her own strength and not rely on her own identity. That would be meaningless. All the women were worried about Luan. Xiao Chen and Xiao Qing were drinking silently at the side. Luan didn't know that so many people were looking at her. After entering the Myriad Demon's plane, she didn't team up with anyone and directly headed to the depths of the plane. In Luan's opinion, the closer one was to the core of the Myriad Demon's plane, the more tokens there would be. As long as she could snatch a token, she would be able to pass the first round of the assessment. Luan was already a big girl. As she traveled alone, a faint smile hung on the corner of her mouth. However, her expression gave people a feeling of stubbornness as she softly muttered to herself. Humph, this time, I'll definitely give father a big surprise. As Luan grew older, she hoped more and more to gain Xiao Chen's approval. However, with such a heaven-defying father, it was indeed very difficult for Luan to surpass Xiao Chen. However, this was also part of Luan's unyielding character. This time, Luan took the initiative to participate in the recruitment competition because she wanted to impress Xiao Chen. She secretly swore that she would perform well this time and surprise her father. Luan held her breath and strode toward the depths of the Myriad Demon's plane. Along the way, Luan did encounter many attacks from demonic beasts. However, with Xiao Luan's current cultivation and combat strength, ordinary demonic beasts were basically no threat to her. Moreover, for this recruitment competition, some of the more powerful demonic beasts in the Myriad Demon's plane had already been wiped out by the experts of the sword sect. As Xiao Luan made her way to the core of the Myriad Demon's plane, she finally encountered a perfected Celestial Emperor stage demonic beast. At a glance, she saw the token in the demonic beast's hand. Upon seeing this, Xiao Luan's eyes lit up. She immediately attacked the demonic beast. Since Xiao Luan's cultivation had already reached the perfected Celestial Emperor stage, it did not take her long to kill the demonic beast and successfully obtain the token. As soon as she entered the Myriad Demon's plane, Xiao Luan obtained the token. With the token in her hand, an excited smile appeared on her face. She even waved her fist in the air. Bai Ruiyue, Qin Shuru, and the others, who had been observing Xiao Luan through the light mirror, also smiled when they saw Xiao Luan successfully obtaining the token. However, at this moment, a group of young cultivators appeared in front of Xiao Luan. The leader of the group was dressed in a luxurious brocade robe. It was obvious that he was a disciple of a big family. When this group of people appeared in front of Xiao Luan, they involuntarily looked at the token in Xiao Luan's hand. Upon seeing this, Xiao Luan's eyes were filled with vigilance. She said with some displeasure, "What's the matter? Miss, we have no ill intentions and will not snatch the token. You can rest assured," the leader of the group said with a smile. At the same time, a hint of amazement flashed in his eyes when he looked at Xiao Luan. It was obvious that this young man was attracted to Xiao Luan. Xiao Luan was very beautiful. She was not inferior to Qin Shiru and the other ladies, except that she was a little immature. His eyes were filled with admiration. When Xiao Luan was about to leave, the young man chased after her and said politely, "May I know your name, miss? I'm Qin Xian. There are many demonic beasts in the myriad demons plain. Since Miss is alone, why don't we travel together?" It was obvious that Qin Xian had feelings for Xiao Luan. However, Xiao Luan was not interested in this and said, "There's no need for that. I'm not used to being with unfamiliar people." Having said that, Xiao Luan disappeared from the spot in a flash. Qin Xian looked at Xiao Luan's departing figure and murmured reluctantly, "What a beautiful woman! Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 22-20. The Qin family that Qin Xian was in was a large family with at least 3 End Realm experts. Qin Xian was the only son of the current head of the Qin family, and could be said to be the young master of the Qin family. He had shown great talent since he was young, and was highly valued by the higher-ups of the Qin family. This time, they wanted Qin Xian to participate in the sword sect's recruitment competition. Firstly, the Qin family thought highly of the sword sect, and wanted to use Qin Xian to enter the sword sect to form a relationship with the sword sect. Secondly, it was to train Qin Xian. One must know that although the Qin family was strong, it depended on who they were compared to. Compared to the sword sect, the Qin family was nothing. Therefore, it was normal for Qin Xian to enter the sword sect. Qin Xian had originally thought that this recruitment competition was just a formality for him. All along, Qin Xian had been very confident in his talent and combat strength. He believed that he would definitely succeed in this recruitment competition, so from the beginning to the end, Qin Xian actually didn't have much fighting spirit. Qin Xian originally thought that it would be a boring recruitment competition, but after seeing Xiao Luan, he didn't think so anymore. Since he was young, Qin Xian had seen many beauties. Even in the city where the Qin family was located, there were countless girls who liked Qin Xian. However, Qin Xian had never met a girl who could move his heart. After seeing Xiao Luan, Qin Xian admitted that he was moved. When he saw Xiao Luan for the first time, Qin Xian had a feeling that his heart was moved. He looked in the direction that Xiao Luan left in a daze. At the same time, the few young men who came with Qin Yuan went up and said, "Young master, do you want me to investigate this girl's identity?" "No need. You can't help me with this." Qin Xian smiled and rejected them. Although Qin Xian was a little arrogant, he wasn't bad overall. At least, he didn't bully others like the other disciples of big families. His reputation was not bad. As for his arrogance, there was nothing that could be done about it. After all, Qin Xian's family background and his own talent were all there. It would be strange if such a person did not have any arrogance. However, facing Xiao Luan, Qin Xian planned to use his own ability to pursue her. He didn't need to use any tricks. Of course, Qin Xian wouldn't use any tricks to pursue a woman, especially when it was his first time falling in love with a woman. As soon as Qin Xian finished speaking, he immediately chased after Xiao Luan without waiting for anyone to reply. Qin Xian had already made up his mind to pursue Xiao Luan and make her his woman. However, Xiao Luan was completely unaware of this. Since young, she had never been in close contact with any man other than Xiao Chen and Xiao Qing. Naturally, Xiao Luan knew nothing about relationships between men and women. Now that he had obtained his own token, Xiao Luan was no longer in a hurry. He strolled around leisurely as if he was on a scenic tour. As Xiao Luan strolled around the Demon Plain leisurely, he soon met 3 young martialists who were participating in the recruitment contest. The 3 of them blocked Xiao Luan's path. One of them even sneered. "Little beauty, are you alone? Why don't you join us?" Compared to Qin Xian, the 3 of them were obviously much easier to deal with. In response, Xiao Luan shouted coldly, "Get lost!" Xiao Luan didn't have a good impression of the 3 of them. However, the 3 of them were unmoved by Xiao Luan's cold shout. They even laughed out loud. "Haha, you have a personality, but I like it." Xiao Luan was about to retaliate when a green light shot out from afar. Immediately, one of the men was hit by the green light and was sent flying. Xiao Luan was about to retaliate when Xiao Luan was about to retaliate. Someone made a move. The person who made the move was none other than Qin Xian. After sending one of them flying, Qin Xian appeared beside Xiao Luan. He looked at Xiao Luan with concern and asked, "How are you? Are you all right?" Qin Xian's attitude was completely different from the 3 of them. He was worried from the bottom of his heart. In response, Xiao Luan gently shook her head to indicate that she was fine. After confirming that Xiao Luan wasn't injured, Qin Xian turned to look at the remaining 2. At the same time, the 2 of them revealed a ferocious look and shouted, "Who are you? Are you courting death? Shameless boasting. How dare you say such words? I am Qin Xian from the Qin clan. Do you have the ability to fight? I would like to see who is courting death today." Qin Xian said nonchalantly. When the 2 of them heard this, their expressions changed. They had naturally heard of the Qin clan. Immediately, one of them asked in fear, "Qin clan? Which Qin clan? Which Qin clan did you say it was?" Qin Xian coldly laughed. Just the Qin clan alone was enough to make the 2 of them tremble in fear. Seeing this, Qin Xian couldn't be bothered to waste time with the 2 of them and immediately shouted, "Get lost!" In response to Qin Xian's cold shout, the 2 of them didn't dare to stay any longer. They didn't dare to provoke the Qin clan. Immediately, they left with the person who was injured by Qin Xian. After the 3 of them left, Xiao Luan curiously looked at Qin Xian and asked, "Are they afraid of you?" Naturally, she could tell that Qin Xian's family wasn't simple. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to scare the 3 of them away with just a few words. They didn't even dare to say a single word. However, Xiao Luan was merely curious. After all, no matter how extraordinary Qin Xian's family was, how could it be compared to her? One should know that Xiao Luan was the daughter of the sword sex leader, Xiao Chen. Seeing that Xiao Luan took the initiative to ask him, Qin Xian naturally didn't know what Xiao Luan was thinking. "It's nothing. It's just that my family has some power. I have dealt with trash like him since I was young." Qin Xian didn't hide his family background in front of Xiao Luan. However, in response to Qin Xian's words, Xiao Luan didn't have much of an expression. She remained calm and only said a few words. "Thank you." Regardless of whether it was necessary, Qin Xian had helped her. Therefore, Xiao Luan still thanked him. However, Qin Xian naturally wasn't satisfied with this. Seeing that Xiao Luan was about to leave, Qin Xian hurriedly followed up. "I still don't know your name." "Xiao Luan." Hearing this, Xiao Luan didn't hide her name this time and told Qin Xian her name. After hearing Xiao Luan's words, Qin Xian didn't think too much about it. He didn't even think about Xiao Chen. After all, there were so many people with the surname Xiao in the Great Thousand World. Qin Xian, who had been following Xiao Luan, invited her enthusiastically. "Xiao Luan, why don't we travel together? This way we can take care of each other. Don't worry if you encounter any danger, I will definitely protect you. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of this chapter. Chapter 22-21. Qin Xian was like a dogskin plaster that stuck to Xiao Luan. Xiao Luan's attitude towards him was neither warm nor cold. Xiao Luan didn't like Qin Xian at all. Although Qin Xian could be considered a genius, it wasn't enough to catch Xiao Luan's attention. Xiao Luan had known a lot of people since she was young. Not to mention her father, Xiao Chen, there were many disciples in the sword sect that didn't belong to Qin Xian. In terms of talent, Qin Xian wasn't considered the top in the sword sect. Therefore, Xiao Luan naturally wouldn't treat Qin Xian differently like other women. It was the first time he met such a woman. However, the colder Xiao Luan was, the more Qin Xian wanted to attract her attention. The two walked side by side. Behind them, Qin Xian's companions followed closely. Along the way, Qin Xian took good care of Xiao Luan and didn't do anything out of the ordinary. However, Qin Xian didn't know that his every move was being watched by several pairs of eyes. Through the mirror, Qin Shuru and the other women, as well as Bai Ryue, saw Qin Xian and frowned. As experienced people, how could they not know that Qin Xian wanted to pursue Xiao Luan? However, Xiao Luan was the little princess of the Xiao clan. Qin Shuru and the other women wouldn't be careless about Xiao Luan's marriage. Qin Shuru's eyes flashed with a strange light. Soon, she summoned a Swords Gate elder, pointed at Qin Xian on the mirror, and said, "Investigate this person's identity." However, when he saw Xiao Luan on the mirror, he was slightly taken aback and looked at Xiao Chen in surprise. "Xiao Luan, you're right. You're right. You're right. You're right." The elder didn't know that Xiao Luan was also participating in the recruitment. However, since Xiao Chen didn't mention it, it was obvious that he didn't want too many people to know. Therefore, the elder naturally understood what he meant. After being stunned for a moment, the elder quickly left the courtyard and began to investigate Qin Xian's background. It was not difficult for the sword sect to investigate a person. Therefore, in just an hour, all of Qin Xian's information was presented to Qin Shuru and the other girls. Qin Shuru and the other women frowned as they read the detailed records of Qin Xian's childhood. Hong Xiu even said indifferently, "The Qin family? A disciple of a small family?" The Qin family, which everyone thought was powerful, was just a small family in Hong Xiu's eyes. This was normal. After all, with Hong Xiu's status, she naturally looked down on the Qin family. The young master of the Qin clan was naturally not worthy of Xiao Luan. As soon as he finished speaking, the girls couldn't help but look at Xiao Chen. After all, this kind of matter still depended on Xiao Chen's opinion. Faced with the girls' gazes, Xiao Chen, who was drinking with Xiao Qin, said helplessly, "We don't have to care about children's matters. Let them settle it themselves." Luan Luan is no longer a child. Xiao Chen naturally saw Qin Xian's admiration for Xiao Luan. However, Xiao Chen didn't care too much about it. Moreover, Qin Xian hadn't done anything out of line, so Xiao Chen naturally didn't want to care about it. Seeing Xiao Chen's indifference, Qin Shuru and the other women rolled their eyes at him. Then, the girls gathered together and discussed various matters regarding Qin Xian. Qin Xian obviously didn't know that all of his information had been placed in front of Qin Shuru and the other women. He also didn't know that the family background he was proud of was not worth mentioning in the eyes of Qin Shuru and the other women. In the Demon's Plain, everything went smoothly. Xiao Luan had already obtained the token, and the rest of the time was obviously more relaxed. 3 days later, Qin Xian and the rest had also obtained their tokens. Everyone found a place to rest and prepared to wait for the end of the first round of the grand competition. Qin Xian and Xiao Luan sat around a fire by a lake. To be precise, Qin Xian had been pestering Xiao Luan. He even specially hunted a demonic beast and barbecued it for Xiao Luan. The dignified young master of the Qin clan actually barbecued meat for a woman. If this news were to spread to the Qin clan, many people's jaws would drop. However, Xiao Luan didn't seem to be excited at all. She still appeared cold. Perhaps he was used to Xiao Luan's attitude, so Qin Xian didn't mind at all. He still enjoyed it. They waited idly for the end of the first round of the grand competition. In the next few days, Xiao Luan and the rest didn't encounter any danger. However, as time passed, the competition in the Demon's Plain became more intense. Many of the young warriors who participated in the recruitment competition also fought, and there were even cases of death. Of course, this was nothing strange. Moreover, at the beginning, the Swords Gate had already said that there would definitely be deaths in this recruitment competition. There were only 10,000 tokens in total. However, there were more than 100,000 warriors who participated in the grand competition. There were too many monks and too little meat. Naturally, competition was unavoidable. Even Xiao Luan and the rest encountered a few fights. However, Qin Xian was always there to protect them. This guy wasn't bad. He said that he would protect Xiao Luan and he did it. In fact, with Qin Xian's strength, he was already considered a top-notch existence among the warriors who participated in the grand competition. In addition to his reputation as the young master of the Qin clan, there weren't many who dared to provoke him. With Qin Xian's protection, Xiao Luan didn't encounter any danger. He didn't even need to fight. As such, 7 days passed quickly. Everyone left the Demon's Plain. Among them, those who obtained tokens were naturally overjoyed. As for those who didn't obtain tokens, they chose to leave dejectedly. Outside the Demon's Plain, the 2 sword sect elders from 7 days ago appeared again and announced that the second round of the grand competition would be held in 3 days. As such, those who obtained tokens and passed the first round were given 3 days to rest. Regarding this, Qin Xian invited Xiao Luan warmly. "Xiao Luan, where do you live? Why don't you follow me to the East Sword City? My clan has a villa there." Around the Sword Sect there were 4 newly built cities. The East Sword City was one of them. As the Qin clan was a big clan in the Great Thousand World, it wasn't strange for them to have a villa in the East Sword City. Faced with Qin Xian's invitation, Xiao Luan thought about it and agreed. It had been a long time since Xiao Luan went out to play. Xiao Luan naturally didn't want to go back. Furthermore, Xiao Chun had promised that he wouldn't restrict Xiao Luan's freedom in this grand competition. As such, Xiao Luan naturally seized the opportunity to play. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 22-22. Qin Xian was overjoyed to see Xiao Luan nodding in agreement. She immediately brought Xiao Luan to the East Sword City. Qin Xian was elated to see Xiao Luan nodding in agreement. She immediately brought Xiao Luan to the East Sword City. Xiao Luan wanted to go out and have some fun. Qin Shuru and the other ladies who had been paying attention to her couldn't stand it. They came to Xiao Chen's side and spoke at once. "Hubby, Luan is going to the East Sword City. Aren't you going to take care of her?" It was apparent that Qin Shuru and the other ladies weren't willing to let Xiao Luan go to the East Sword City. They didn't want Xiao Luan to stay in the Qin family. After all, in their eyes, how could the young master of the Qin family be worthy of Luan? However, Xiao Qin forced a smile. "All right, Luan isn't a child anymore. Besides, I've promised her that I won't restrict her freedom during the competition. You can't expect me to go back on my words, right?" Xiao Qin wasn't worried about Xiao Luan's safety at all. What a joke. Would anything happen to her at her own home? Then the Sword Sect would really live up to its reputation. Xiao Qin didn't mind at all. Qin Shuru and the other ladies rolled their eyes at Xiao Qin. Then, they ignored Xiao Qin and went to the side to have a discussion. Xiao Qin didn't know what Qin Shuru and the other ladies were discussing. He let out a helpless sigh and muttered under his breath. "Sigh, what a loving mother. Wasn't your mother like this when you were young?" Xiao Qing scolded with a smile. Qin Shuru and the other ladies were unusually nervous about Luan. Wasn't Bai Riyue the same when Xiao Qin was young? All mothers in the world were the same. Hearing his father's words, Xiao Chen didn't refute. Forget it, let them be. Anyway, with how nervous they were about Luan Luan, Xiao Chen knew that no matter what he said, they wouldn't listen. While the ladies were worried about Xiao Luan had already arrived at Eastern Sword City under Qin Xian's lead. Xiao Luan was naturally familiar with Eastern Sword City. She had followed her mothers here many times. It could be said that Xiao Luan was much more familiar with Eastern Sword City than Qin Xian. Once she entered East Sword City, Xiao Luan quickly walked into the city according to her memory. She remembered that there was a shop in East Sword City that sold tonghulu that was especially delicious. Last time, Second Mother 100 Flower Fairy had bought it for Xiao Luan. Not knowing where Xiao Luan was going, Qin Xian naturally followed closely behind. However, a young man beside him whispered to Qin Xian, "Young master, is it appropriate for us to bring her home? After all, the Qin family isn't a place where just anyone can enter." Admittedly, Xiao Luan was very beautiful. However, it was inappropriate for Qin Xian to bring her home just because of that. After all, the Qin family wasn't a place where just anyone could enter. Hearing this, Qin Xian's expression darkened. "It's not up to you to interfere in my matters." He knew what this person meant. However, after interacting with Xiao Luan for a few days, Qin Xian discovered that he had indeed fallen in love with this woman. Not only because of Xiao Luan's appearance, but also because of Xiao Luan's personality and the feeling she gave him. He had never felt this way before. Qin Xian was certain that he had truly fallen in love with Xiao Luan. With a low shout, Qin Xian hurriedly chased after Xiao Luan. Following which, the two of them passed through the main street and arrived at a small alley. Just as they entered the alley, they saw a tonghulu shop. The shop wasn't big. It could even be said that it was very small. However, seeing this shop, Xiao Luan happily ran up and said to the old man selling tonghulu, "Grandpa, I want 2 tonghulu skewers." This old man didn't have any cultivation. He was just an ordinary person. However, the tonghulu he made tasted amazing. At the very least, Xiao Luan liked it very much. The old man gave off a very kind feeling. When he heard Xiao Luan's request, he smiled and said, "Okay." Soon, he passed 2 tonghulu skewers to Xiao Luan and said, "Little girl, why didn't your mother come with you this time?" It was obvious that the old man still remembered Xiao Luan. It couldn't be helped. Both mother and daughter were extremely beautiful. It was indeed difficult for people to forget them. Xiao Luan took the tonghulu skewers and said with a smile, "Second mother is at home. I came alone this time." After saying that, she waved her hand at the old man and left. Following which, she brought the tonghulu skewers to Qin Xian and handed one to him. "Try it. The tonghulu skewers here are pretty good. Mother brought me here to eat it last time. I really liked it." After spending a few days with Qin Xian, the two of them gradually became familiar with each other. However, Xiao Luan didn't have any feelings for Qin Xian. Perhaps it could be said that Xiao Luan's personality was the same as Xiao Chen's. They belonged to the type of people who didn't care about anything. Until now, Xiao Luan still didn't feel any feelings for Qin Xian. She only treated Qin Xian as an ordinary friend. The reason why she gave Qin Xian a tonghulu skewers was because she treated him as a friend. However, Qin Xian didn't think so. After receiving the tonghulu skewers from Xiao Luan, Qin Xian immediately said happily, "Okay, I'll try it." Looking at the happy smile on Xiao Luan's face and the 2 dimples on her cheeks, Qin Xian was stunned for a moment. As he ate the tonghulu skewers, he strolled around the city with Xiao Luan. Qin Xian admitted that he liked to be with Xiao Luan. No matter what he did, as long as he was with Xiao Luan, he would feel very happy. The two of them strolled around the Eastern Sword City. When they saw that the sky was gradually darkening, Qin Xian also suggested that they return. With regards to this, Xiao Luan did not say anything. Under Qin Xian's strong invitation, she followed him to the Qin clan's other courtyard. The Qin family's courtyard in the East Sword City wasn't small. The location was also quite good. From this, one could see the Qin family's wealth. After all, the houses in the East Sword City weren't cheap. This was especially so for a courtyard with such a good location and size. The price was even higher. Moreover, this was only one of the Qin family's courtyards. However, Xiaoluan didn't care about this. She naturally followed Qin Xian into the courtyard. However, just as they arrived at the front courtyard, they saw a middle-aged man walking towards them. When Qin Xian saw this middle-aged man, he opened his mouth and called out, "Second uncle." This person was Qin Xian's second uncle. This time, he had specially accompanied Qin Xian to the sword sect to participate in the recruitment competition. When he heard Qin Xian's words, his second uncle nodded his head slightly. After which, he turned his gaze towards Xiaoluan and said with some displeasure, "Xian, who is she?" "Second uncle, she is my friend. Her name is Xiaoluan." When Qin Xian heard this, he smiled and said. Seeing this, Xiaoluan also politely greeted him. However, Qin Xian's second uncle ignored Xiaoluan's politeness. At the same time, he said to Qin Xian with some displeasure, "Xian, it's not that I want to nag you, but you should know that we have important matters to attend to in the Sword Mansion. This isn't the time to talk about love. Moreover, you should know the rules of the family. Not just anyone can be brought home. If your father finds out, he will definitely beat you up." Chapter 22-23. Qin Xian's second uncle clearly didn't like Xiaoluan. In his opinion, Qin Xian shouldn't be focusing on a woman right now. Instead, he should be focusing on preparing for the recruitment competition, especially in the third round. It would be best if he could obtain a good result. Qin Xian's second uncle clearly didn't like Xiaoluan. In his opinion, Qin Xian shouldn't be focusing on a woman right now. Instead, he should be focusing on preparing for the recruitment competition, especially in the third round. It would be best if he could obtain a good result. It was undeniable that Xiaoluan was very beautiful, but so what? There were so many beauties in the world. As the young master of the Qin clan, how could he ruin his plans for a woman? In front of Xiaoluan, Qin Xian's second uncle didn't show any mercy. His words were also extremely unpleasant. Hearing this, Qin Xian immediately said with some displeasure, "Second uncle, what are you saying? Xiaoluan is my friend. It's not what you think." "I don't care. You have to know your mission as the young master of the Qin clan. In addition, you have to know that since you are the young master of the Qin clan, not just anyone can be your woman in the future. After all, she is the mistress of the Qin clan." Qin Xian's second uncle didn't back down. It was obvious that Qin Xian's second uncle treated Xiaoluan as an ordinary person without any background. Qin Xian still wanted to say something, but Xiaoluan spoke first. "Qin Xian, I think I should go back. By the way, thank you for playing with me today. I'm very happy." Although Xiaoluan was a little insensitive like Xiaoqin, she wasn't a fool. Since Qin Xian's second uncle was so obvious, Xiaoluan naturally felt that he didn't welcome her. Since that was the case, Xiaoluan naturally wouldn't ask for a rebuff. Moreover, to be honest, Xiaoluan wasn't very interested in the Qin clan. She didn't have any intention of climbing up the social ladder of the Qin clan. What a joke. As the little princess of the sword sect, did Xiaoluan need to climb up the social ladder of the Qin clan? She wondered what Qin Xian's second uncle would think if he knew Xiaoluan's identity. Would he regret what he did today? It was obviously a good opportunity to form a relationship with the sword sect. If Qin Xian could have a relationship with Xiaoluan, it would be much better than Qin Xian joining the sword sect. Unfortunately, Qin Xian's second uncle had destroyed this possibility. However, Xiaoluan wasn't angry. At the same time, he didn't want to use his power to bully others. Under the guidance of Xiaoqin, Xiaoluan never used his family background to bully others. Xiao Luan had never done such a thing. This time, Xiao Luan did not give Qin Xian a chance to speak. He turned around and left. Seeing this, Qin Xian glanced at his second uncle in displeasure. However, he did not say anything. After all, the other party was his elder. He quickly chased after Xiao Luan. When Qin Xian arrived at the entrance of the Qin residence, he caught up with Xiao Luan. Looking at Xiao Luan's calm expression, Qin Xian didn't know if she was angry. "Xiao Luan, I'm sorry. I think my second uncle might have misunderstood something." "It's fine, Xiao Luan smiled. She didn't take this matter to heart. But before Xiao Luan finished her sentence, she heard a pleasant voice calling out to her from afar. "Luan, Luan." Looking in the direction of the voice, Qin Xian saw a beautiful woman in a purple dress walking over leisurely. At first glance, Qin Xian was stunned on the spot. It was the first time he saw such a beautiful woman in this world. She was so beautiful that it gave people a surreal feeling. While Qin Xian was in a daze, Xiao Luan ran toward the beautiful woman in the purple dress and called out happily, "Second mother, why are you here?" The woman was none other than Hundred Flower Fairy. After a round of discussion, they decided that they couldn't let Xiao Luan spend the night in the Qin residence, so Hundred Flower Fairy personally came to East Sword City. It was fortunate that Bai Hua Fairy had arrived a little late, otherwise, if she had seen how Qin Xian's second uncle looked down on Xiao Luan, the Qin clan would have faced the wrath of the Swords Gate matriarch. Xiao Luan jumped into Hundred Flower Fairy's embrace happily. Hundred Flower Fairy caressed Xiao Luan's head affectionately and scolded with a smile. "You're not home all day and only know how to run around. Do you know how worried your mothers are about you? They asked me to come pick you up." "Second mother." Xiao Luan revealed a pitiful look after being scolded by Hundred Flower Fairy. Hundred Flower Fairy smiled helplessly. "All right, you mischievous girl. Let's go home." Since Hundred Flower Fairy had personally come to East Sword City, Xiao Luan naturally had to return home. In response, Xiao Luan could only nod his head unwillingly. However, before he left, Xiao Luan turned his head and waved goodbye to Qin Xian. "Qin Xian, see you in the second round of the grand competition." After saying that, she disappeared into the crowd under Hundred Flower Fairy's lead. From the beginning to the end, Hundred Flower Fairy didn't even look at Qin Xian. Apparently, he was completely ignored. With Hundred Flower Fairy's status, it was natural that she wouldn't care about a mere young master of the Qin family. Even if the Qin family's ancestor came, Hundred Flower Fairy wouldn't even give him a second glance. After watching Hundred Flower Fairy and Xiao Luan leave, Qin Xian finally murmured after a long while, "Is that Xiao Luan's mother?" From Hundred Flower Fairy, other than her beautiful appearance, what touched Qin Xian the most was the temperament that Hundred Flower Fairy unconsciously exuded. It was a temperament that belonged to someone who had been in a high position for a long time. Such a temperament made Qin Xian not dare to look directly at Hundred Flower Fairy, as if she was the queen of the heavens. At the same time, Hundred Flower Fairy also made Qin Xian feel a great pressure. This pressure had nothing to do with cultivation. Moreover, Qin Xian had never felt this kind of pressure even from his own father. Unaware of Qin Xian's thoughts, after following Hundred Flower Fairy back to the sword sect, Xiao Luan was naturally taught a lesson by Qin Shuru and the other girls. The girls all loved their daughter dearly. In the end, it was Xiao Chen who spoke up, allowing Xiao Luan to escape. In the next few days, Xiao Luan was naturally unable to leave the sword sect. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Today, it was time for the second round of the competition. After the first round of eliminations, the number of people in the second round was obviously much lower. There were only a mere 10,000 people. Furthermore, for the second round of the grand competition, Swords Gate had built a battle arena in a separate small world for the second round of the grand competition. The participants would be fighting there for the second round of the grand competition. Qin Xian and Qin Xian's second uncle entered the pocket dimension. Qin Xian's second uncle went directly to the spectator seat. However, wherever he went, many people would take the initiative to greet him. Although the Qin clan's power and influence could not be compared to the Sword Sect, it was still not something that those small factions could compare to. Qin Xian's second uncle smiled and nodded in response to everyone's compliment. Then, he went to a seat closer to the front and sat down, waiting for the competition to begin. Chapter 22-24. The second round of the competition was also conducted in the form of a single elimination tournament, but it was a battle of life and death. The second round of the competition was also conducted in the form of a single elimination tournament, but it was a battle of life and death. 10,000 Katian sect disciples who had committed a capital offense had already been selected. Of course, their cultivation levels were also selected, and they were basically at the same level as the young martial artists who were participating in the recruitment competition this time. Because of this, spectators were allowed to watch the second round of the competition. For example, Qin Xian's second uncle, many of the family elders who had followed these young martial artists to participate in the recruitment competition also came to the spectator seats and took their seat. With the identity of Qin Xian's second uncle, he was naturally respected and flattered by many people. However, his seat was not in the first row but in the second row. As for the first row, it was reserved for the elders of the Sword Sect. Even with the identity of Qin Xian's second uncle, it was naturally impossible for him to be on equal footing with the elders of the Sword Sect. Moreover, it was said that Vice Sect leader Lin Qing would personally host the second round of the competition. Although Lin Qing was only one of the Vice Sect leaders of the Sword Sect, he held great power. It was no exaggeration to say that the power of any of the Vice Sect leaders of the Sword Sect was definitely much greater than the so-called Qin clan's patriarch. Therefore, everyone was looking forward to Vice Sect leader Lin Qing personally hosting the second round of the competition. After all, he was the Vice Sect leader of the Sword Sect. Everyone would be satisfied if they could exchange a few words with him. The spectator seats were already packed. Below, in the preparation area, the 10,000 young martial artists who had passed the first round of the competition were already preparing. Everyone knew that their opponents were the disciples of the Katian sect. Although they might be the lowest outer court disciples of the Katian sect, they were not to be underestimated. After all, the Katian sect was once one of the 10 great Lingtian sects. Their disciples were obviously not a bunch of good-for-nothings. Lin Qing's idea of using the disciples of the heavenly sect to test the new disciples was indeed a good idea. Because in this way, it would prove that the new disciples of the Sword Sect were obviously stronger than those of the heavenly sect. As for the word cruel, it was simply a joke. The winner was king while the loser was in the wrong. Since the heavenly sect had lost, wouldn't their disciples be at the mercy of the Sword's Gate? Therefore, there was nothing cruel about it. Furthermore, the hands of these heavenly sect disciples were also stained with the blood of the Sword's Gate disciples. While they were preparing for the upcoming battle, Qin Xian anxiously searched for Xiao Luan's figure. After searching for a while, Qin Xian saw Xiao Luan and immediately went up to greet her happily. "Xiao Luan!" Qin Xian called out with a smile. Upon hearing Qin Xian's voice, Xiao Luan waved her hand. However, just as the two of them greeted each other, an extremely untimely voice interrupted the conversation between the two of them. "Yo, Qin Xian! Which family's young lady are you trying to trick this time?" The voice was filled with thick mockery. Qin Xian turned to the voice and saw a young man dressed in luxurious clothes striding toward him. Qin Xian immediately snapped at the young man. "Zhang Xian, are you trying to pick a fight?" It was apparent that Qin Xian knew Zhang Xian and their relationship didn't seem to be harmonious. In fact, the Zhang family that Zhang Xian belonged to was also a large family. In terms of strength, it wasn't much weaker than the Qin family. Moreover, the Qin family and the Zhang family weren't far apart, and there had always been conflicts between the two families. Therefore, as the young masters of the two families and geniuses with extraordinary talents, Qin Xian and Zhang Xian had always disliked each other since they were young. Qin Xian knew that Zhang Xian was participating in the sword sex recruitment competition, which was why he wasn't surprised to see Zhang Xian here. However, it wasn't easy for Qin Xian to speak to Xiao Luan, and Zhang Xian came over to mess things up. This made Qin Xian extremely unhappy. As expected, the smile on Xiao Luan's face quickly disappeared upon seeing Zhang Xian. She said to Qin Xian indifferently, "I'll be leaving first." She didn't wait for Qin Xian's reply and left immediately. Qin Xian was inwardly vexed as he gazed at Zhang Xian's back view. Don't pick a fight for no reason. Then, he turned around and left. This wasn't the place to make a move. After all, Qin Xian was in the sword sect, and he didn't dare to provoke the sword sect's prestige. Qin Xian and Xiao Luan left. However, Zhang Xian didn't care about this at all. He only looked at Xiao Luan's back view and revealed a faint smile. What a beautiful lady! Qin Xian, it seems like I'll have to snatch her away again. Xiao Luan didn't know what Zhang Xian was thinking. Even if she knew, she probably wouldn't care. With Xiao Luan's status, if Zhang Xian dared to do anything out of line, the entire Zhang family would be buried with him. Therefore, if Zhang Xian had some self-awareness, he wouldn't have done something that he shouldn't have. Zhang Xian's appearance didn't affect Xiao Luan at all. Although Qin Xian still wanted to look for Xiao Luan, he gave up on the idea after some thought. He could only curse Zhang Xian in his heart. Zhang Xian's appearance was only a small interlude. Very quickly, the second round of the competition began. There were a total of 10 stages according to their respective numbers, and the competition would be held in all 10 stages at the same time. One by one, the young martial artists, whose names were called, stepped onto the battle ring and began the second round of the competition. Compared to the first round, the second round of the competition was obviously more dangerous because the disciples of the heavenly sect wouldn't hold back. They would use their killing moves as soon as they attacked. It was either life or death. Therefore, as soon as the competition began, there were already people who fell. Of course, there were also disciples of the heavenly sect who were killed. But no matter what, the second round of the competition was obviously more brutal than the first. Battle after battle continued. While the battles were going on the 7th arena, a battle had just ended. When the referee, who was acting as the referee, glanced at the name list, he was stunned. This was because the name list stated that the next participant was Xiao Luan. The judge knew who Xiao Luan was. She was the daughter of the sect leader. But, taken aback, the deacon instinctively called out, "Xiao Luan." Hearing her name, Xiao Luan strode onto stage 7. However, when Xiao Luan appeared on stage 7, Lin Qing, who was sitting on the main seat, stood up abruptly. When he saw Xiao Luan on stage 7, Lin Qing exclaimed in surprise. Miss Lin Qing was obviously shocked by Xiao Luan's appearance. Not only him, but the surrounding elders of Swords Gate were also dumbfounded at this moment. Please add me to your collection. Please recommend me. End of chapter. Chapter 22-25. Xiao Luan's appearance made Lin Qing and the other experts of the sword sect extremely nervous. They were very clear about Xiao Luan's identity. She was the apple of Xiao Qin's eye. If anything were to happen to her, Xiao Qin would definitely skin them alive. Xiao Luan's appearance made Lin Qing and the other experts of the sword sect extremely nervous. They were very clear about Xiao Luan's identity. She was the apple of Xiao Qin's eye. If anything were to happen to her, Xiao Qin would definitely skin them alive. They didn't dare to be careless. Lin Qing even had the thought of stopping the competition. However, just as Lin Qing was hesitating, a golden light from a sound transmission talisman entered the space between Lin Qing's eyebrows. The sound transmission talisman was sent by Shao Chen. The content was very simple. It was just a single sentence. It was clear that he didn't want Xiao Luan to affect the recruitment competition. At the same time, he didn't want Xiao Luan's identity to be exposed. He also didn't want Lin Qing to give Xiao Luan any preferential treatment because of her identity. After receiving Xiao Chen's message, Lin Qing quickly understood Xiao Chen's intentions. It was clear that Xiao Chen wanted to train Xiao Luan. Lin Qing could only forcefully suppress the worry in his heart. He nodded slightly at the deacon on the 7th arena. Seeing this, the deacon ordered the disciples of the heavenly sect to enter the arena. Lin Qing completely obeyed Xiao Chen's orders. However, his eyes were still fixed on the 7th arena. Although Xiao Chen's intentions were very clear, Lin Qing naturally didn't dare to be careless. He couldn't let anything happen to Xiao Luan. Therefore, he had been paying attention to every movement on the 7th arena. It would be best if Xiao Luan could win. However, if Xiao Luan was in danger, Lin Qing would definitely save her immediately. Lin Qing was secretly observing everything that was happening in the 7th arena. As for the Swords Gate Elder's strange behavior, not many people noticed it. After all, Lin Qing and the others were very good at concealing themselves. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to see through them. Under Lin Qing's secret observation, a heavenly sect disciple was brought up to the 7th arena. Obviously, he already knew that he was going to die. Therefore, when he looked at Xiao Luan, this heavenly sect disciple did not have the slightest hesitation. In any case, it was better to drag someone down with him. Looking at Xiao Luan without restraint, this heavenly gate disciple sneered, "Tisk tsk, a little beauty. Seems like my luck is not bad, to be able to have a beauty as a companion before I die." In the face of a predestined outcome, many disciples of the heavenly sect had nothing to fear, so they naturally had nothing to be afraid of. An icy glint gradually surfaced in Xiao Luan's eyes when she saw the heavenly coiling sect's disciple brazenly sizing her up. Because of Xiao Chen, Xiao Luan did not have a good impression of the heavenly coiling sect. Naturally, Xiao Luan would not feel any pity for this heavenly coiling sect's disciple. After removing the seal on the heavenly sect's disciple's cultivation, the aura of a perfected celestial emperor instantly soared into the sky. His cultivation was at the same level as Xiao Luan. With a sneer, the heavenly sect's disciple did not give Xiao Luan any time to prepare. Without hesitation, he attacked Xiao Luan. His eyes were brimming with killing intent as he said, "Die!" Xiao Luan's expression did not change in the face of the heavenly sect's disciple's attack. She tilted her body and dodged the attack. At the same time, a long sword appeared in her hand from her storage ring. This long sword was given to Xiao Luan by Xiao Chen. It was extraordinary. With the long sword in hand, Xiao Luan's aura became even sharper. She slashed out with the sword and shouted coldly, "Green Lotus Sword Qi." Following Xiao Luan's shout, a green sword ray shot towards the heavenly sect's disciple at lightning speed. The green lotus sword Qi was Xiao Chen's signature celestial skill. Naturally, he had imparted it to Xiao Luan. Moreover, Xiao Luan had long cultivated the green lotus sword Qi to the perfected stage. When the terrifying green sword ray flashed out, the heavenly sect's disciple's eyes turned solemn. However, he did not choose to dodge the attack. Instead, he chose to take it head-on. Once again, he threw out a punch. Similarly, he also used his signature celestial skill. Both of them collided violently. In the end, the heavenly sect's disciple was sent flying. The outcome of the collision was obvious. It was clear that Xiao Luan was stronger. Lin Qing, who was sitting on the main seat, heaved a sigh of relief when she saw this. Since Xiao Luan was stronger than the heavenly sect's disciple, as long as Xiao Luan did not underestimate her opponent, she should not be in any danger. After being sent flying by Xiao Luan's sword, before the heavenly sect's disciple could regain his balance, Xiao Luan immediately executed the absolute Yin movement technique. She did not give the heavenly sect's disciple any time to react. She quickly caught up with the heavenly sect's disciple and did not show any mercy. Xiao Luan continuously slashed out 3 times. Facing Xiao Luan's attack, the heavenly sect's disciple tried his best to resist. Unfortunately, he was not strong enough and was killed by Xiao Luan in the end. The outcome of the battle had been determined. Xiao Luan's performance naturally attracted the attention of many people, including Qin Xian's second uncle. Qin Xian's second uncle naturally knew Xiao Luan. They had just met 3 days ago. However, at that time, Qin Xian's second uncle thought that Xiao Luan was not worthy of Qin Xian. Therefore, he did not show any mercy. However, looking at it now, Xiao Luan's strength was already extraordinary. I wonder what her family background is like. If she is from an ordinary family, she is still not worthy of Qin Xian. Qin Xian's second uncle thought inwardly. As such, Qin Xian's second uncle could not help but take another look at Xiao Luan. He still thought that Xiao Luan was not worthy of Qin Xian. However, Qin Xian's second uncle had never thought that it was not Xiao Luan who was not worthy of Qin Xian. Instead, it was Qin Xian who was worthy of Xiao Luan. In terms of family background, Xiao Luan was simply miles ahead of Qin Xian. After the battle ended, the deacon of the 7th arena let out a sigh of relief. At least Xiao Luan did not suffer any injuries. He immediately announced the result. Xiao Luan had successfully passed the second round of the competition by killing his opponent. It could be said that Xiao Luan had successfully joined the sword sect with his own strength. However, Xiao Luan's goal was obviously not limited to this. If he wanted his father, Xiao Qin, to have a whole new level of respect for him, Xiao Luan would need to achieve a good result in the 3rd round of the competition. It would be best if he could come out on top. Moreover, Xiao Qin would be there in person for the 3rd round of the competition. Xiao Luan was even more reluctant to embarrass himself in front of his father. Otherwise, all the bold words he had said back then would become a joke. He must achieve a good result in the 3rd round of the competition. With this thought in mind, Xiao Luan walked down from the arena with a calm expression. He did not seem to be excited about passing the 2nd round of the competition. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. End of chapter. Chapter 22-26. Xiao Luan easily defeated her opponent and walked down the stage. Xiao Luan was about to leave, but after taking a few steps, Qin Xian, who had also just finished his battle, came looking for her. Xiao Luan easily defeated her opponent and walked down the stage. Xiao Luan was about to leave, but after taking a few steps, Qin Xian, who had also just finished his battle, came looking for her. Qin Xian had also defeated his opponent. With Qin Xian's strength, this wasn't surprising. After all, the Qin clan had spent a lot of effort on Qin Xian since he was young. Therefore, it wasn't too difficult for him to defeat an ordinary heavenly sect outer disciple. After the battle, Qin Xian hurriedly came looking for Xiao Luan. With a smile on his face he said, "Xiao Luan, congratulations. Now we are brothers and sisters." Qin Xian was really happy that Xiao Luan had successfully passed the 2nd round of the competition. This way, he could enter the sword sect with Xiao Luan. In the future, they would all be disciples of the sword sect and would be brothers and sisters. As the saying goes, the pavilion closest to the water enjoys the moonlight first. Since they were both disciples of the sword sect, Qin Xian's chances of wooing Xiao Luan were obviously much higher. However, Xiao Luan wasn't too excited in the face of Qin Xian's congratulations. She only said indifferently, "Didn't you win too?" Hearing Xiao Luan's words, Qin Xian smiled and invited Xiao Luan to the East Sword City again. However, this time, Xiao Luan rejected. Previously, when they went to the East Sword City, Qin Shure's second uncle's attitude had already made everything clear. Xiao Luan naturally wouldn't ask for a rebuff. Moreover, after being brought home by her second mother, Hundred Flower Fairy, Qin Shuru and the other girls didn't allow Xiao Luan to go out alone. Xiao Luan was helpless about this. Qin Xian was a little disappointed and felt a little guilty at the same time. Xiao Luan, I'm sorry. My second uncle is like this. He has a sharp tongue but a soft heart. Please don't take what happened last time to heart. Qin Xian explained, thinking that Xiao Luan was still brooding over her second uncle's matter. However, Xiao Luan shook her head and said, "It doesn't matter. My mother didn't allow me to go out." As for Qin Xian's second uncle, Xiao Luan didn't take it to heart. Given their identities, it was destined that they wouldn't have much interaction, so there was no need to take it to heart. After hearing Xiao Luan's words, Qin Xian could only helplessly nod. Qin Xian, after all, since Zhao's mother didn't allow Xiao Luan to go out, what could he say? After all, the two of them had already passed the second round and were almost certain to enter Sword's Gate. The third round was merely a ranking competition. And Qin Xian's second uncle to the entrance, Qin's twos to the door to the door to the door. Twos. And Qin, of course, Xiao. And was for him, of course, to enter was to the point, to the talk to him, to the was to chat, thought, to the was for? Lin Qing was naturally here because of Xiao Luan. However, when he saw Xiao Luan and Qin Xian appear together, Lin Qing was stunned. Looking at Qin Xian's appearance, Lin Qing quickly guessed that Qin Xian was probably pursuing Xiao Luan. As an experienced person, Lin Qing naturally saw through the clues at a glance. However, what Lin Qing did not expect was that before he could speak, Qin Xian's second uncle had already spoken first. "Xian this is Vice Sect Leader Lin Qing. Hurry up and greet him. And you, little girl, greet him as well." Qin Xian's second uncle wanted to introduce Lin Qing to Qin Xian. He even called Xiao Luan along. Lin Qing's eyes flashed with displeasure when he heard Qin Xian's second uncle's words. It was because Qin Xian's second uncle's tone was filled with disdain when he spoke to Xiao Luan. Qin Xian's second uncle didn't know Xiao Luan's identity. In Lin Qing's eyes, his actions were simply courting death. However, Xiao Luan still didn't give Lin Qing a chance to speak. She came in front of Lin Qing and bowed respectfully. "Greetings, Vice Sect Leader." As she spoke, she secretly made a funny face at Lin Qing. Lin Qing understood that Xiao Luan did not want to reveal his identity, after which Qin Xian also hurriedly bowed. His attitude was very respectful and reverent. Lin Qing didn't reveal Xiao Luan's identity when the two young men bowed. However, Lin Qing's second uncle's next sentence made Lin Qing laugh. Qin Xian's second uncle introduced Xiao Luan to Lin Qing. "Vice Sect Leader Lin Qing, this is my elder brother's only son, Qin Xian. He is here to participate in the recruitment competition. As for Xiao Luan, she is my nephew's girlfriend. I hope Vice Sect Leader Lin Qing can take care of her." He directly described Xiao Luan as Qin Xian's girlfriend. Lin Qing was stunned when he heard this. He then looked at Xiao Luan with a strange expression and then looked at Qin Xian. It was undeniable that Qin Xian was handsome, but in Lin Qing's opinion, he was not worthy of Xiao Luan. Xiao Luan was the little princess of the Sword Sect. A mere young master of the Qin clan was nothing to her. However, Qin Xian's second uncle thought that Xiao Luan wasn't good enough for Qin Xian. When he talked about Xiao Luan, his tone was filled with disdain. If it wasn't for the fact that Xiao Chun and Xiao Luan didn't want to reveal their identities, Lin Qing would definitely teach Qin Xian's second uncle a lesson. However, he obviously couldn't do that now. As such, Lin Qing could only laugh dryly. "Haha, alright. I still have things to do. I won't stay any longer." After he finished speaking, Lin Qing walked away. He didn't give Qin Xian's second uncle any face. Qin Xian's second uncle naturally didn't dare to show any dissatisfaction. After Lin Qing left, Qin Xian's second uncle looked at Qin Xian and said, "Let's go." They still had to prepare for the third round. Although the third round was a ranking battle, the higher the ranking, the greater the benefit. Therefore, they couldn't afford to be careless. They completely ignored Xiao Luan. Before they left, Qin Xian bid farewell to Xiao Luan and left with his second uncle. After Qin Xian and his nephew left, Lin Qing, who had already left, appeared beside Xiao Luan again. He looked at Xiao Luan and said with a bitter smile, "Young miss, what are you up to this time?" "Uncle Lin, you can't expose my identity," Xiao Luan said with a smile. Xiao Luan was famous in the sword sect for being mischievous. However, it could be said that Lin Qing had watched Xiao Luan grow up. Therefore, Lin Qing doted on Xiao Luan like a senior to a junior. Qin Xian's second uncle's attitude made Lin Qing unhappy. However, when he saw Xiao Luan's pleading look, Lin Qing finally nodded helplessly. "All right, Uncle Lin won't speak nonsense. I know Uncle Lin is the best. All right, I'll go back now. Uncle Lin, you can continue with your work." Seeing that Lin Qing had agreed, Xiao Luan happily hugged Lin Qing and skipped away. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 22-27. After easily passing the second round of the competition, Xiao Luan happily returned home. Qin Shuru and the other girls were also happy to see Xiao Luan return safely. After easily passing the second round of the competition, Xiao Luan happily returned home. Qin Shuru and the other girls were also happy to see Xiao Luan return safely. Qin Shuru and the other girls weren't too concerned about whether Xiao Luan passed the second round of the competition or not. As long as Xiao Luan was safe, that was enough for them. However, apart from worrying about Xiao Luan's safety, Qin Shuru and the other girls were also thinking about another matter, which was Qin Xian. They had already investigated Qin Xian thoroughly. Although Qin Xian didn't have any major misdeeds since he was young, and his reputation was very good, the most important thing was that he was clean and honest. He seemed like a good junior. It was obvious that Qin Xian adored Xiao Luan. However, Qin Shuru and the other girls weren't very optimistic about Qin Xian. First of all, the difference in status between the two was too big. However, in this regard, Xiao Chen and Qin Shuru had a different opinion. According to Xiao Chen, they shouldn't interfere in the affairs of the youngsters. As long as Qin Xian didn't do anything out of line, they should be allowed to develop on their own. Everything depended on their own fate. As for the final result, Xiao Chen's idea was to let nature take its course. However, Qin Shuru and the other girls obviously disagreed. In the end, Xiao Chen couldn't stand them and directly threw this matter to them. Anyway, Xiao Chen had always been too lazy to care about such trivial matters. Unlike Xiao Luan, Qin Xian had been thinking about Xiao Luan ever since he returned to his residence with his second uncle. He didn't know why, but Xiao Luan's position in Qin Xian's heart was getting more and more important. Qin Xian didn't care about Xiao Luan's family background and other aspects, but Qin Xian's second uncle didn't think so. He had already ordered people to investigate Xiao Luan. However, there had been no news, which made Qin Xian's second uncle very puzzled. With the Qin family's means, it wasn't difficult to investigate a person's information. However, Xiao Luan was like a mystery that couldn't be investigated at all. With each of them having their own thoughts, the time for the third round of the ranking battle was quickly set. It would be held 3 days later, and this time, it would be held in the main square of the sword sect. There were a total of 7,000 people who passed the second round of the competition. The remaining 2,000 people failed. They were either killed by the disciples of the heavenly sect or were defeated by the disciples of the heavenly sect. Although they survived, they had no chance of becoming a disciple of the sword sect. 3 days passed quickly as they prepared for the third round of the ranking battles. On this day, over 7,000 young warriors who had passed the first 2 rounds of the ranking battles were finally able to enter the Sword Sect. After entering the Sword Sect, everyone curiously looked at everything around them. There were many young cultivators dressed in the Sword's Gate disciples' attire walking in and out of the pavilions. All of these made the young cultivators envious. The Sword Sect's environment was indeed picturesque. It was simply like a paradise on earth. Especially when facing the senior disciples wearing the Sword Sect's uniform, these young warriors were even more excited. Fortunately, after passing the first 2 rounds of the ranking battles, they could already be considered as disciples of the Sword Sect. Today's ranking battles were only to determine their strength ranking. Under the guidance of a person, everyone was brought to the main square. At this time, there were already 10 arenas built in the main square. The 3rd round of the ranking battles would be held here. Similarly, people like Qin Xian's second uncle could also watch the battles from the side. The Sword Sect had specially set up seats for them and provided them with fine wine and delicacies. Compared to the first 2 rounds of the ranking battles, the atmosphere of the 3rd round was obviously much more relaxed. After all, even the losers could enter the Sword Sect. As a result, the pressure in everyone's hearts was naturally much less. Without any pressure, many young warriors gathered together and chatted in groups of 3 to 5. Qin Xian naturally found Xiao Luan at the first moment. Seeing Xiao Luan, Qin Xian was obviously very happy. He didn't know why, but in any case, Qin Xian really liked being with Xiao Luan. Sitting in the audience, Qin Xian's second uncle looked at Xiao Luan, who was chatting with Qin Xian. A trace of doubt involuntarily flashed through his eyes. Using the Qin clan's power, but in the end, they still couldn't find out Xiao Luan's identity. This made Qin Xian's second uncle extremely depressed. At the same time, he was secretly curious about Xiao Luan's identity. With the Qin clan's power, it was naturally impossible for them to find out anything if they wanted to investigate Qin Xian. Unless Qin Shuru and the other girls intentionally exposed Xiao Luan's identity, the Qin clan wouldn't be able to find any clues even if they investigated until the end. The competition soon began. The rules were obviously different from the first 2 rounds of the ranking battles. That was, no killing was allowed. Moreover, on each arena, there were dedicated Sword Sect deacons who were responsible for acting as referees. Of course, if necessary, they could intervene to prevent any death. The rules were obviously much softer, but this was normal. After all, over 7,000 young warriors present were basically new disciples of the Sword Sect. As such, it was obvious that they couldn't be casually killed. As usual, Lin Qing personally hosted the competition. After he loudly announced the start of the competition, all 10 arenas began to compete at the same time. The 3rd round of the ranking battles was divided into 2 days. On the first day, the top 10 would be decided. On the second day, the top 10 would battle each other. As for Xiao Qin, he would only appear the next day. Today, only Lin Qing hosted the competition. All 10 arenas began to compete at the same time. As the battles began and ended, Xiao Luan also stepped onto the arena. After a few battles, Xiao Luan finally determined the top 10. Successfully entering the top 10 wasn't too difficult for Xiao Luan. After all, he had been personally taught by Xiao Qin since he was young. Xiao Luan's combat strength wasn't weak. It wasn't difficult for him to enter the top 10. At the same time, other than Xiao Luan, Qin Xian and Zhang Xian also entered the top 10. As the top 10 were finally determined, the first day of the competition also came to an end. Those who entered the top 10 would continue to compete in the top 10 finals the next day. Of course, being able to enter the top 10 had its own benefit. This benefit was that after entering the Sword Sect, they would be able to obtain various preferential treatment. They would be nurtured as core disciples by the Sword Sect and would be able to enjoy a certain degree of resources. After the announcement of the top 10, everyone was arranged to stay in the Sword Sect. As for the other disciples who didn't enter the top 10, they were directly accepted into the outer court of the sword sect. There was a special outer court deacon responsible for arranging their accommodations, begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 22-28. Those who ranked in the top 10 were naturally happy because this ranking would bring them a lot of benefits after joining the sword sect. After the first day of the ranking battles ended, Qin Xian invited Xiao Luan to tour the sword sect. Now that he was considered a new disciple of the sword sect, Qin Xian wanted to familiarize himself with the sword sect in the future. Xiao Luan didn't reject Qin Xian's invitation. Both of them strolled around the sword sect together. Xiao Luan was incomparably familiar with the sword sect. After all, she grew up in the sword sect and had been to many places. However, Xiao Luan didn't tell Qin Xian about this as she didn't want him to know her identity for the time being. Xiao Luan was clear that her identity would shock Qin Xian, which was why she chose to keep it a secret. However, as they walked side by side through the picturesque scenery of Swords Gate, they unknowingly arrived at the summit of one of the mountain peaks around Swords Gate. It was evening and the sun was setting in the west. The blood-red sunset illuminated the surroundings beautifully. Qin Xian suddenly turned to Xiao Luan and said in a serious tone, "Xiao Luan, I like you." This was considered a straightforward confession. Qin Xian pondered for a long time before mustering the courage to say this. Xiao Luan was taken aback. This was the first time someone confessed to her and Xiao Luan was at a loss. Xiao Luan didn't hate Qin Xian, but it was far from liking him. Xiao Luan had always treated Qin Xian as a good friend and didn't have the slightest bit of romantic feelings for him. Qin Xian continued, "I've fallen in love with you since the first time I met you." "Xiao Luan, I'm sincere." Qin Xian blurted out his thoughts without any hesitation. He was afraid that he wouldn't have the courage to say these words in the future. But after hearing Qin Xian's words, Xiao Luan blushed and shook her head shyly. "I'm sorry, Xiao Luan wanted to reject Qin Xian." However, before Xiao Luan could speak, Qin Xian interrupted, "Don't say anything. Just give me a chance. Don't be in a hurry to reject me." It was Qin Xian's first time confessing to the woman he liked. At this moment, his heart was also in a mess. However, compared to this, Qin Xian wanted to let Xiao Luan know his feelings. At the same time, he was also afraid that Xiao Luan would reject him. Therefore, after speaking his mind, Qin Xian did not expect Xiao Luan to agree on the spot. He only hoped that Xiao Luan would give him a chance. Looking at Qin Xian's pleading face, Xiao Luan didn't know how to answer. In the end, he could only say, "I'll bring you to a place. You can make your decision then." Xiao Luan didn't have any romantic feelings for Qin Xian, but he didn't want to hurt Qin Xian either. After all, Qin Xian was his friend. Not knowing how to deal with this, Xiao Luan thought of her mother and immediately brought Qin Xian back to her home. Xiao Luan's home was naturally Xiao Chen's home. However, Qin Xian didn't know anything about this at this moment. As the sect master of the sword sect, Xiao Chen's residence was naturally the best in the sword sect. It also had the densest heaven and earth spiritual energy. Following Xiao Luan, Qin Xian arrived at the core area of the sword sect's main peak. Along the way, Qin Xian noticed something unusual. First, Xiao Luan seemed to be very familiar with the sword sect. Secondly, Xiao Luan was able to bring him through many areas guarded by the sword sect's disciples or areas protected by talisman arrays. Qin Xian already had a guess in his heart, so he probed, "Xiao Luan, is your family from the sword sect?" "You can say so." Xiao Luan nodded when he heard this. From Qin Xian's point of view, Xiao Luan's parents were probably some elders or deacons of the sword sect. This made sense. However, Qin Xian clearly didn't expect that Xiao Luan's parents weren't elders of the sword sect, but the sword sect's sect master, Xiao Chen. Under Xiao Luan's lead, the two quickly arrived at Xiao Chen's residence. After entering the residence, Qin Xian was simply stunned by the scene before him. The heaven and earth spiritual energy in the surroundings was extremely dense. It was comparable to the best cultivation secret realm in the Qin family, perhaps even surpassing it. Secondly, there was the fairyland-like environment in the cave, as well as the natural treasures that could be seen everywhere. Along the way, Qin Xian saw no less than 10 priceless treasures of heaven and earth. His eyes filled with shock, Qin Xian asked in disbelief, "Xiao Luan, is this really your home?" Hearing this, Xiao Luan turned to look at Qin Xian and said seriously, "Yes, let's go. I'll bring you to see my parents." Saying this, Xiao Luan brought Qin Xian to a bamboo garden. He knew that Xiao Chen must be here at this time. The environment was beautiful, surrounded by green bamboo. Under Xiao Luan's lead, Qin Xian quickly saw Xiao Chen in the bamboo forest. There was a simple wooden table and a praying mat. Dressed in white, Xiao Chen was sitting cross-legged on the praying mat, cultivating with his eyes closed. With the arrival of Xiao Luan and Qin Xian, Xiao Chen slowly opened his eyes. In fact, when Xiao Luan and Qin Xian had just entered the residence, Xiao Chen had already noticed Qin Xian, but he didn't stop him. Seeing Xiao Chen in front of him, Qin Xian was immediately stunned. He naturally knew who this handsome man was. As a young genius who wanted to enter the sword sect, Qin Xian had naturally seen Xiao Chen's portrait. Moreover, Qin Xian had always regarded Xiao Chen as his idol. He dreamed that one day, he would be able to personally see what kind of person his idol was. Now, his idol was only 10 meters away from him, but Qin Xian was so nervous that he couldn't even speak. What Xiao Luan said next shocked Qin Xian to the extreme. Xiao Luan happily ran to Xiao Chen and intimately hugged Xiao Chen's neck. She happily shouted, "I knew Daddy was here. You little girl, there are friends here. Don't you know how to be shy? Come down." Facing Xiao Luan's affectionate behavior, Xiao Chen affectionately scolded her. "Daddy." Listening to the conversation between the father and daughter, Qin Xian finally found out about Xiao Luan's family background. Xiao Luan and Xiao Chen were both surnamed Xiao. However, who would have thought that Xiao Luan's father was the sect master of the sword sect, one of the top heroes in the Great Thousand World, Xiao Chen? Qin Xian was completely shocked. He didn't even know what to do next. Fortunately, Xiao Luan spoke in time to help him out. "Daddy, this is my friend, Qin Xian. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 22-29. Xiao Luan took the initiative to introduce Qin Xian. Xiao Chen looked at his daughter strangely, but he still turned to Qin Xian and smiled. "Qin Xian, right? Don't be shy. Have a seat." Xiao Luan introduced Qin Xian. Xiao Chen looked at his daughter strangely, but he still turned to Qin Xian and smiled. "Qin Xian, right? Don't be shy. Have a seat." Xiao Chen appeared to be very easygoing, but even so, Qin Xian still appeared to be very nervous, so much so that he was at a loss for what to do. Xiao Chen didn't reveal any aura, nor did he take the initiative to exert any pressure on Qin Xian. Even so, Qin Xian still felt immense pressure when facing Xiao Chen. It was almost unbearable. Qin Xian couldn't be blamed. Not to mention Qin Xian, even the patriarch of the Qin clan would feel nervous in front of Xiao Chen. Qin Xian's reaction was normal. The reason why Xiao Luan brought Qin Xian here was to tell him about her background. Qin Xian had asked about Xiao Luan's identity in a roundabout way, but Xiao Luan had never answered him directly. Today, Qin Xian took the initiative to confess to Xiao Luan, so Xiao Luan decided to tell him everything. Xiao Luan didn't dislike Qin Xian, but it was still too early to say that she liked him. Moreover, if Qin Xian wanted to pursue her, he had to get past her family no matter what. If he couldn't even get past her family, how could Qin Xian be qualified to pursue Xiao Luan? Although Xiao Luan had never been in a relationship before, She was naturally intelligent and knew that everything depended on Qin Xian. Therefore, she remained silent at the side. Qin Xian instinctively sat opposite Xiao Chen, but even so, his back was still straight and he looked like a block of wood. He did not dare to meet Xiao Chen's eyes. Seeing Qin Xian's appearance, Xiao Chen smiled slightly and personally made a cup of tea for him. Then, he said with a smile, "My daughter has been spoiled by her mothers since she was young. It has been hard on you during this period." As the sect master of the sword sect, Xiao Chen spoke casually, but Qin Xian hurriedly interjected. No, sect master, you're exaggerating." Qin Xian was unable to send the message. Xiao Chen could only smile bitterly. At the same time, Qin Shuru and Flower Fairy also arrived. Clearly, they knew that Xiao Luan had brought Qin Xian back. Qin Shuru and Flower Fairy knew everything about Qin Xian like the back of their hands. The information about Qin Xian's childhood had also been placed in front of them. This was their first official meeting with Qin Xian. However, compared to Xiao Chen, Qin Shuru and Flower Fairy did not seem to think highly of Qin Xian. Naturally, their expressions were not as casual as Xiao Chen's. Although Qin Shuiruo did not criticize Qin Xian directly, the two women did not have much of an expression on their faces when they arrived. They sat down on either side of Xiao Chen. Then, Qin Shuiruo whispered to Xiao Luan. "You're fooling around again. You even brought him back home." Qin Shuru and Flower Fairy naturally knew about the relationship between Qin Xian and Xiao Luan. They knew that Qin Xian had been pursuing Xiao Luan. However, Qin Shuru and the other women obviously did not like Qin Xian. Men and women had completely different thoughts on the same matter. For example, Xiao Chen did not mind at all. However, Qin Shuru and the other women were very cautious. After being scolded by Qin Shuru, Xiao Luan lowered her head in grievance. Seeing this, Qin Shuru did not say anything. Instead, he looked at Qin Xian and asked, "Qin Xian, don't be nervous. We have heard a little about you and Luan Luan. After all, Luan Luan is our daughter. Naturally, we have to care about her. May I know your purpose for coming here today?" Qin Xian did not know Qin Xian's purpose for coming here. Hearing this, Qin Xian did not know how to answer. Ever since he found out about Xiao Luan's identity, Qin Xian's head had been buzzing. He could not calm down at all. Qin Xian did not know how to answer and could only choose to remain silent. Fortunately, Xiao Chen interrupted at this moment. "All right, let's not add to the trouble of the children. Let Luan Luan and the others settle it themselves." Xiao Chen saw Qin Xian's nervousness and directly left with Qin Shuru and Flower Fairy, leaving Xiao Luan and Flower Fairy alone. Although Qin Shuru and Flower Fairy were unwilling to leave, since Xiao Chen had spoken, the two women could only obey. They got up and disappeared on the spot. After leaving the bamboo forest and returning to the courtyard, Flower Fairy said coquettishly, "What do you mean? Why do you have to make us leave? You too. Didn't you see how nervous that kid from the Qin family was? What can you get out of him if you continue to ask?" In response, Xiao Chen said helplessly with a bitter smile. Qin Shuru and Flower Fairy would not be able to get anything out of Qin Xian's state just now. It was better to let the two of them talk on their own. Xiao Chen did not want to interfere too much. After all, Xiao Luan was no longer a child. She had her own thoughts. Most of the time, it was not necessarily a good thing to interfere too much. After hearing Xiao Chen's words, Qin Shuru and Flower Fairy rolled their eyes at Xiao Chen. Then, they did not say anything else and left. Seeing the two women leave, Xiao Chen shook his head and smiled bitterly. Who did he offend? It was as if he was a bad person. After Xiao Chen left with Qin Shuru and Flower Fairy, Qin Xian felt a lot more relaxed. Looking at Xiao Luan, Qin Xian hesitated for a while and finally asked in disappointment. "Sect Master Xiao Qin, is he really your father?" "Yes." Xiao Luan nodded without the slightest hesitation. After knowing Xiao Luan's identity, Qin Xian felt a lot of pressure. Previously, when he was with Xiao Luan, Qin Xian thought that with his family background, he would never let Xiao Luan suffer any grievances, nor would he owe her anything. But now, it seemed that his thoughts were laughable. With Xiao Luan's identity, his identity as the young master of the Qin family was not worth mentioning at all. If Xiao Luan were to marry him in the future, it would be the same as marrying someone of a lower status. Qin Xian's gaze was complicated because Xiao Luan's identity was far beyond his expectations. After staring at Xiao Luan for a long time, Qin Xian finally gave up. "You're telling me all this because you want me to back off and give up on my unrealistic thoughts?" Qin Xian could not be blamed for having such thought. Anyone who encountered such a situation would inevitably have such thoughts. Therefore, it was not strange for Qin Xian to have such thoughts. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2230. Qin Xian felt that Xiao Luan was telling him all this just to make him back off. However, Xiao Luan shook his head and said, "Don't worry about it." Qin Xian felt that Xiao Luan was telling him all this just to make him back off. However, Xiao Luan shook his head and said, "Don't worry about it. That's not what I meant. I admit that I don't like you, but I don't hate you either. As for your sudden confession, I really don't know how to handle it. So before I think it through, I hope that you can confirm your thoughts. Will you really be able to do what you said regardless of what kind of person I am?" Xiao Luan's thoughts weren't what Qin Xian said. Of course, if Qin Xian chose to give up because of this, Xiao Luan wouldn't say anything. After all, Xiao Luan didn't have any special feelings for Qin Xian. If Qin Xian continued to persist, perhaps Xiao Luan would be able to make up her mind and make her own choice one day in the future. Qin Xian took a deep look at Xiao Luan before standing up and mocking himself. "You've given me such a huge surprise. I think I need to calm down." Xiao Chun and Qin Shuru had left, leaving Xiao Luan alone. As a result, the pressure on Qin Xian was reduced by a lot. However, his heart was still in a mess, so Qin Xian needed to calm down by himself. Xiao Luan nodded slightly and personally sent Qin Xian out of the cave dwelling. She watched as Qin Xian left before turning around to return to the cave dwelling. Qin Xian didn't know how to choose, and this was actually what Xiao Luan was happy to see. If Qin Xian's first reaction after knowing her identity was to agree, perhaps Xiao Luan would be even more disappointed. Because such an answer didn't represent how much Qin Xian liked Xiao Luan, but rather, Qin Xian was interested in Xiao Luan's background. This wasn't the result that Xiao Luan wanted. Fortunately, Qin Xian didn't do that. Or perhaps, Qin Xian really had feelings for Xiao Luan, which was why he neglected Xiao Luan's background. Even though Xiao Luan had openly revealed his identity to Qin Xian, and he knew that Xiao Luan's identity could allow Qin Xian to reach the top in a single bound, Qin Xian still didn't care about this. Or rather, his focus wasn't on this. Qin Xian didn't even know how he returned to his residence. He only knew that after leaving Xiao Luan's place, he was walking in a daze. Unknowingly, he arrived outside his residence. It was a small courtyard, but the scenery was very good. This was the residence that the sword sect prepared for Qin Xian and his second uncle. It was located in the outer area of the sword sect and was used to entertain guests. After going out for such a long time, the sky had already darkened. Qin Xian returned in a daze. Seeing this, Qin Xian's second uncle walked up to support Qin Xian's body with a puzzled expression. "Xian, you? What happened to you?" Qin Xian's condition clearly wasn't right. Tomorrow was the third round's battle for the top 10. At this moment, Qin Xian's second uncle obviously couldn't bring out his strongest strength. This was why Qin Xian's second uncle was so worried. After helping Qin Xian sit down in the pavilion in the courtyard, he personally poured a cup of tea for Qin Xian. After watching Qin Xian drink it in one gulp, his second uncle continued to ask, "Xian, what happened to you? Where did you go just now?" Qin Xian's second uncle continued to ask. Qin Xian's second uncle was still fine. How did he become like this after going out? Under his second uncle's interrogation, Qin Xian finally spoke. I went to Xiao Luan's house just now. Xiao Luan's house? Qin Xian's second uncle was startled. Although the Qin family had used all their resources to investigate Xiao Luan, they still didn't find anything. And now, Qin Xian actually said that he went to Xiao Luan's house. He was even more puzzled. At the same time, he asked curiously, Xiao Luan's house is in the sword sect? What's her identity? This was the sword sect. Besides, Qin Xian's second uncle also heard that Xiao Luan's family wasn't among the guests. So why was Xiao Luan's house in the sword sect? Could it be that, just like Qin Xian, his second uncle guessed that Xiao Luan's family couldn't be a deacon or elder in the sword sect, right? This was the only explanation why Xiao Luan's house was in the sword sect. However, Qin Xian's next sentence also caused his second uncle to be stunned on the spot. Qin Xian spoke in a neither hurried nor slow manner. Xiao Luan's father is sect master Xiao Chen. Xiao Luan was Xiao Chen's daughter. Hearing this, Qin Xian's second uncle was stunned. He stood there motionless and said in disbelief after a long while, That's right. Xian this isn't a joke. Sect master Xiao Chen isn't our Qin family's. He thought that Qin Xian was joking. But shortly after, Qin Xian said with certainty, I'm not joking. I went to Xiao Luan's house and saw sect master Xiao Chen. He is Xiao Luan's father. Qin Xian definitely wasn't joking about this matter. Qin Xian's second uncle was speechless. No wonder the Qin family couldn't find any traces of Xiao Luan even after mobilizing so much manpower. So that's the reason. It would be strange if the Qin family could find out anything about Xiao Chen's daughter. Previously, Qin Xian's second uncle thought that Xiao Luan was at most a descendant of an aristocratic family. But in terms of strength, she definitely couldn't be compared to the Qin family. Therefore, Qin Xian's second uncle looked down on Xiao Luan. But now, Xiao Luan was actually Xiao Chen's daughter. Qin Xian's second uncle was shocked when he thought about how he looked down on Xiao Luan. Xian since that's the case, then why did I? Qin Xian's second uncle panicked when he thought about how he looked down on Xiao Luan. He was afraid that Xiao Luan would take revenge. After all, with Xiao Luan's status, it was easy for her to persuade a vice-sect master of the sword sect to deal with the Qin family. Even if the Qin family had 3 End-Realm ancestors, they wouldn't be able to resist a vice-sect master of the sword sect. At the very least, they would be severely injured. Qin Xian's heart was filled with fear. But compared to her second uncle, Qin Xian appeared calm. Don't worry, Xiao Luan isn't such a person. Besides, if she really holds a grudge, do you think you can still stand here and talk to me? She didn't think that Xiao Luan would take revenge on her second uncle because of such a small matter. Moreover, even if she wanted to take revenge, she would have done it long ago. Why would she wait until now? After telling her second uncle not to worry, Qin Xian walked back to her room. Leaving behind a simple sentence, she returned to her room. I'm a little frustrated. Second uncle, please don't disturb me. Let me think about it. Begging to be added, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Sword Master 8 Desolation will continue to update on Green Dough. There are no advertisements on the website. Please add and recommend Green Dough. If you like Sword Master 8 Desolation, please add. Sword Master 8 Desolation Green Dough updates the fastest. Chapter 2231. Today, Xiao Luan had truly shocked Qin Xian. Facing Xiao Luan, who had such a background, Qin Xian naturally couldn't be as relaxed as before. In front of Xiao Luan, Qin Xian's status as the young master of the Qin clan was simply too weak. Today, Xiao Luan had truly shocked Qin Xian. Facing Xiao Luan, who had such a background, Qin Xian naturally couldn't be as relaxed as before. In front of Xiao Luan, Qin Xian's status as the young master of the Qin clan was simply too weak. Qin Xian needed to be alone. Regarding this, Qin Xian's second uncle was also stunned in the courtyard. He was still shocked by Xiao Luan's identity. He had never imagined that Xiao Luan was actually Xiao Chen's daughter. However, after recovering from his shock, Qin Xian's second uncle suddenly recalled that Qin Xian was currently pursuing Xiao Luan. Looking at Xiao Luan's appearance, it seemed like she didn't hate Qin Xian. In that case, if Qin Xian and Xiao Luan could really fall in love with each other, wouldn't the Qin clan and Xiao Chen become in-laws? For the Qin family there were obviously many benefits. After all, the in-laws were equivalent to a family. Thinking of this, Qin Xian's second uncle was elated. He immediately sent a message to his elder brother, who was Qin Xian's father and the current patriarch of the Qin clan. Far away from the Sword Mansion, in a beautiful garden of the Qin clan, the patriarch of the Qin clan was cultivating with his eyes closed. Suddenly, a golden ray of light from a sound transmission talisman entered his head. Needless to say, this voice transmission talisman belonged to Qin Xian's second uncle. After knowing the contents of the voice transmission talisman, the patriarch of the Qin clan abruptly opened his eyes. Evidently, he was shocked. The content of the letter was naturally related to Xiao Luan and Qin Xian. Furthermore, it clearly introduced Xiao Luan's status. The daughter of the Sword sect leader, Xiao Chen, Xiao Luan actually had such an identity. In that case, if Qin Xian could successfully pursue Xiao Luan, it would be a great contribution to the Qin clan. After being shocked, the patriarch of the Qin clan revealed an excited smile. He didn't expect such a thing to happen. After pacing back and forth and pondering for a moment, Patriarch Qin quickly replied. He told Qin Xian's second uncle that there was no need to do anything for the time being. Qin Xian and Xiao Luan should just wait and see. Although he knew what benefits Xiao Luan would bring to the Qin clan if she married into the Qin clan, the old and shrewd Master Qin also knew that Xiao Luan's identity was very sensitive. If the Qin clan had any tricks up their sleeves, it would be self-defeating. At that time, if they angered Xiao Chen, not only would the Qin family not get any benefits, they would also have to prepare for Xiao Chen's anger. Therefore, it wasn't appropriate for the other members of the Qin family to make any moves at this time. Qin Xian should handle everything himself. As for the final result, it would depend on the fate of the two. In short, he couldn't let Xiao Chen think that Qin Xian was pursuing Xiao Luan with ulterior motives. It wouldn't benefit Qin Xian or the entire Qin clan. Patriarch Qin had indeed made the right choice. At this time, it wasn't appropriate for the Qin clan to make any move. In the Sword sect, Qin Xian's second uncle soon received Patriarch Qin's reply. After understanding his elder brother's intentions, Qin Xian's second uncle stood up and returned to his room to rest. Although Qin Xian had given the Qin clan a huge surprise by hooking up with Xiao Chen's daughter, the Qin clan was calmer at this time. It wasn't unreasonable for the Qin clan to be able to survive for so many generations. At the very least, the person in charge of the Qin clan was very clear-headed. He knew when to make the right choice. It was also because of this that the Qin clan had made the right choice time and time again, allowing the Qin clan to maintain its prosperity. Although Xiao Luan's identity was very attractive, the Qin clan didn't have to make any moves in the dark. This was because not only would there be no benefits, but it would also make Xiao Chen feel disgusted. The losses outweighed the gains. The Qin clan didn't make any moves and left everything to Qin Xian. As for the final result, it was up to the heavens. The Qin clan didn't make any movements at all, and the night was silent. Early the next morning, the third round of the ranking tournament would begin. Once again, they arrived at the main square. However, on this day, only one of the original 10 arenas remained. It stood at the center of the square. Qin Xian came with his second uncle. As soon as he arrived, he looked around. As expected, he soon saw Xiao Luan's figure. Qin Xian didn't deliberately avoid her and greeted her as usual. Xiao Luan. Seeing Qin Xian, Xiao Luan casually smiled and nodded. The two of them didn't mention what happened yesterday. Qin Xian also didn't do anything special. They stood side by side and chatted casually. After thinking for an entire day yesterday, Qin Xian still couldn't come up with an answer. Until now, Qin Xian still didn't know what decision he had made. In the end, he could only take one step at a time. Let nature take its course. Just as Qin Xian and Xiao Luan were chatting, Xiao Chen, Song Xing, and a few other deputy sect leaders slowly appeared on the high platform in the main square. Xiao Chen was indeed present for today's ranking battle. When everyone saw Xiao Chen, they hurriedly bowed respectfully. In response, Xiao Chen revealed a faint smile and waved his hand. Everyone, please take a seat. Today is the last day of the recruitment competition. Everyone present is the cream of the crop among the hundreds of thousands of people. I hope that all of you will be able to display your full strength without holding back and obtain a good ranking. Xiao Chen said calmly. Seeing Xiao Chen again, Qin Xian realized that even though it was his first time facing Xiao Chen, he still couldn't help but feel nervous. Even though they were so far apart, Xiao Luan was able to make him feel so simple. It was hard to imagine how he would feel when facing Xiao Chen in the future if he really got together with Xiao Luan. Having such a powerful father-in-law wasn't necessarily a good thing. Of course, nothing was set in stone yet. It was still too early to talk about this. Compared to the others, Qin Xian obviously had more thoughts in his mind when facing Xiao Chen. At the same time, Qin Xian's second uncle also had the same thoughts when looking at Xiao Chen on the high platform. He also knew about the relationship between Xiao Luan and Qin Xian. When he thought about the possibility of the two of them being together in the future, he couldn't help but have other thoughts when he looked at Xiao Chen, who was sitting on the main seat. Although his elder brother had already given the order to not let the other members of the Qin clan do anything, this didn't stop him from fantasizing about it. Looking at Xiao Chen on the high platform, Qin Xian's second uncle couldn't help but think that if Xiao Luan and Qin Xian really got together, then the Qin clan and the Xiao clan would become the Qin clan. At that time, the Qin clan would have a powerful backer like the Sword Sect. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2232. Other than Qin Xian and his nephew, none of the other young cultivators present knew of Xiao Luan's identity. After a few simple words, Xiao Chen handed everything over to Lin Qing. Other than Qin Xian and his nephew, none of the other young cultivators present knew of Xiao Luan's identity. After a few simple words, Xiao Chen handed everything over to Lin Qing. Lin Qing was in charge of this recruitment competition from the beginning to the end, so it was only right for him to wrap things up. This was the final stage of the recruitment competition. The 10 young geniuses who made it into the top 10 yesterday were about to enter the final battle. It was hard to say who would emerge victorious in the end. Lin Qing immediately announced the start of the competition. Then, according to their number plates, the first round of battles began. There were only 10 people left. These 10 people were the cream of the crop among the hundreds of thousands of people who signed up for the recruitment competition. None of them were weak. However, even so, the strength of each person was quickly revealed. Based on each person's strength, they could be divided into 3 levels. The weakest 4 were obviously at the bottom. The middle 3 were about the same strength. As for the remaining 3, they were obviously stronger than the other 7. These 3 were Xiao Luan, Qin Xian, and Zhang Xian. The 3 of them were obviously not on the same level as the other 7. As such, the final winner would probably be one of the 3. The others had little chance of winning. With Xiao Chen's eyesight, he could naturally see through everyone's strength. However, Nangong Guan, Zhou Song, and Wu Huan, who were sitting beside Xiao Chen, all had faint smiles on their faces. Occasionally, their gazes would fall on Xiao Luan's body. The three of them were no strangers to Xiao Luan. She was Xiao Chen's precious daughter. As the battles began and ended, it wasn't long before only Xiao Luan, Qin Xian, and Zhang Xian possessed the qualifications to compete for the first position. Moreover, only the three of them still maintained an undefeated record. However, perhaps in order to preserve some suspense, Lin Qing intentionally put the battle between the three of them at the end, and decided the rankings from the 4th place onward. It didn't take long for the rankings from the 4th to the 10th to be determined. Only the top 3 remained. Presently, only Xiao Luan's group of 3 had the qualifications to compete for the top 3 rankings. The top 3 battles were the most anticipated. Following Lin Qing's words, the first battle quickly began. Qin Xian versus Zhang Xian. The two of them immediately clashed. A young master of the Qin clan against a young master of the Qin clan. The two of them already had a grudge against each other. Now that they were fighting in the arena, the smell of gunpowder would naturally fill the air. On the arena, Zhang Xian stood facing each other. He revealed a cold smile and said, "Qin Xian, it has been many years since we last fought, right?" "So what?" Qin Xian's expression was cold when he heard this. "Haha, it's nothing. You're just going to lose to me one more time." Zhang Xian sneered. As his laughter faded, Zhang Xian did not give Qin Xian a chance to reply. His feet moved, and his entire body instantly charged towards Qin Xian. The two of them could be said to be old opponents. They understood each other's strength very well. Therefore, they used their full strength from the start. There was no need to test each other's strength. In fact, Qin Xian's strength was not weaker than his own. Therefore, even though Zhang Xian spoke casually, in reality, he did not dare to be careless when facing Qin Xian. He used his full strength from the start. Facing Zhang Xian's attack, Qin Xian reacted immediately. However, for some unknown reason, the two of them, who were originally of similar strength, actually fell into a disadvantageous position after the first clash. The difference in strength was not great, and they did not suffer any substantial injuries. However, Qin Xian's condition was clearly inferior to Zhang Xian's. For today's battle, Zhang Xian made preparations and adjusted his condition to the peak. On the other hand, because of Xiao Luan's matter, Qin Xian could be said to have not slept at all last night, let alone meditate to adjust his condition. In terms of condition, Qin Xian's condition was obviously inferior to Zhang Xian's. Zhang Xian naturally sensed it immediately. A trace of a sneer flashed in his eyes as he said coldly, "Qin Xian, it seems like I've won this battle." Qin Xian's condition wasn't at the peak of perfection. As such, Zhang Xian was confident. Their strength had always been on par with each other, so the one who was in a better condition would naturally have a higher chance of winning. At this moment, Qin Xian's condition was obviously inferior to his. Therefore, Zhang Xian naturally believed that victory was in his hands. Upon hearing Zhang Xian's words, Qin Xian didn't respond. Instead, he attacked with a gloomy expression and clashed fiercely with Zhang Xian. Qin Xian ignored Zhang Xian and continued to attack with all his might. However, the difference in condition gradually caused Qin Xian to fall into a disadvantageous position. Qin Xian's second uncle had an ugly expression on his face as he watched the battle unfold on the stage. Anyone with a discerning eye could tell that Qin Xian was clearly showing signs of defeat. Although he was still able to hold on, it was obvious that Zhang Xian had a higher chance of winning if the battle dragged on. Seeing that Qin Xian was about to lose, Qin Xian's second uncle was anxious, but there was nothing he could do. This was the sword sect, so naturally they had to abide by the rules of the sword sect. Even though Qin Xian was about to lose and he was burning with anxiety, Qin Xian's second uncle didn't dare to break the rules of the sword sect. In the fierce battle, Qin Xian found it increasingly difficult to defend against Zhang Xian's ferocious attack. Zhang Xian had also discovered Qin Xian's weakness. He seized the opportunity and didn't give Qin Xian any time to catch his breath. Under such ferocious attacks, even though Qin Xian had given his all, he gradually felt that he couldn't hold on any longer. Seeing that Qin Xian was about to lose, Zhang Xian's attacks became increasingly ferocious. In the end, Zhang Xian finally caught hold of a flaw in Qin Xian's defense. He fiercely landed a punch on Qin Xian's chest and sent him flying. Qin Xian didn't have the slightest bit of defense against Zhang Xian's punch. He spat out a mouthful of blood. Qin Xian had been severely injured by Zhang Xian's punch. In this case, it was apparent that Qin Xian had lost. However, Zhang Xian wasn't satisfied with this. After Qin Xian was severely injured by him, Zhang Xian once again lunged forward to deliver a fatal blow. In fact, Zhang Xian's attack was meaningless. After all, Qin Xian had already lost. Perhaps Zhang Xian's attack was due to the accumulated resentment between them. Perhaps Zhang Xian's true intention was to use this opportunity to cripple Qin Xian in one fell swoop. The rules stated that one couldn't kill, but there was no way to avoid injuring or crippling someone. Zhang Xian's eyes glinted with a chilling glint. He was ready to cripple Qin Xian in one fell swoop. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2233. Dense spiritual energy gathered on Zhang Xian's hand. Seeing that Qin Xian was about to be crippled by Zhang Xian, Qin Xian's second uncle abruptly stood up. However, just as he was about to make a move, more than 10 auras locked onto him. There was no doubt that as soon as he made a move, the owners of these 10 auras would instantly restrain him. Dense spiritual energy gathered on Zhang Xian's hand. Seeing that Qin Xian was about to be crippled by Zhang Xian, Qin Xian's second uncle abruptly stood up. However, just as he was about to make a move, more than 10 auras locked onto him. There was no doubt that as soon as he made a move, the owners of these 10 auras would instantly restrain him. The owners of these auras were naturally experts from the Sword Sect. Although Zhang Xian was about to cripple Qin Xian, the Sword Sect had its own rules. Qin Xian's second uncle couldn't directly interfere in the competition. Being locked onto by these auras, Qin Xian's second uncle's expression changed. He clenched his teeth. Clearly, he didn't want to see Qin Xian being crippled by Zhang Xian. However, this was the Sword Sect. He didn't dare to break the rules of the Sword Sect. Otherwise, the entire Qin family wouldn't be able to bear the wrath of the Sword Sect. His eyes were filled with anxiety. However, at this moment, a golden ray of light suddenly descended from the sky and protected Qin Xian's body. At the same time, it also easily destroyed Zhang Xian's attack. Someone stepped in to save Qin Xian, and that person was none other than Xiao Chun, who was sitting in the main seat. At the last moment, Xiao Chun had saved Qin Xian. Naturally, no one said anything about Xiao Chun's intervention. Even Zhang Xian didn't dare to show any dissatisfaction. He only glanced at Xiao Chun in confusion. However, it was only a glance. Zhang Xian didn't dare to meet Xiao Chun's gaze. Looking down from above, Xiao Chun slowly said, "The victor has been decided. There's no need to kill. Today is only a competition. It's not the time to settle personal grudges." Xiao Chun had no intention of blaming Zhang Xian. However, upon hearing this, Zhang Xian hurriedly cupped his hands and said, "Sect Master, please forgive me." This junior was too agitated and did not stop in time. It was truly unintentional. "It's fine," Xiao Chun said indifferently, not caring whether Zhang Xian was telling the truth or not. With Xiao Chun's help, the battle ended. Lin Qing immediately announced that Zhang Xian had won. Seeing that Qin Xian was fine, Qin Xian's second uncle secretly sighed in relief. At the same time, he secretly glanced at Qin Xian on the high platform. A strange look flashed across his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. Qin Xian was helped down the stage. Xiao Luan stepped forward and asked, "How are you? Are you all right?" "It's fine. It's just that I've lost a lot of face," Qin Xian said with a bitter smile. With Xiao Chen's timely help, Qin Xian was naturally fine. Seeing this, Xiao Luan smiled and said, "There's nothing to lose. You weren't in a good state, so you deserved to lose." Xiao Luan spoke very casually with Qin Xian. He wasn't afraid of hurting Qin Xian's feelings. Hearing this, Qin Xian could only shake his head and bitterly smile. His state was indeed inferior to Zhang Xian's. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been defeated so quickly. With Qin Xian's defeat, the only people left who were qualified to fight for first place were Zhang Xian and Xiao Luan. The two of them still had a perfect record, so the first place would naturally come from one of them. Because Zhang Xian had just experienced a great battle, for the sake of fairness, the battle between the two was delayed for 2 hours to give Zhang Xian enough time to recover. At the same time, the sword sect provided Zhang Xian with pills to recover his spirit force and stamina for free. While waiting for Zhang Xian to recover, Xiao Luan didn't seem to be nervous at all. She chatted with Qin Xian from time to time. As for what happened yesterday, the two of them had a tacit understanding not to mention a single word. After thinking about it last night and the crushing defeat from before, Qin Xian had thought it through. Of course, this didn't mean that Qin Xian had chosen to give up on liking Xiao Luan. Instead, he had thought it through and realized that he wasn't worthy of Xiao Luan at all. Xiao Luan was Xiao Chen's daughter, and he was only the young master of the Qin family. With such a status, Qin Xian felt that he wasn't worthy of Xiao Luan. Thus, Qin Xian secretly decided that he would work hard in the future to become truly powerful. Even if he couldn't surpass Xiao Chen, he had to become someone who could protect Xiao Luan. Only then would he be worthy of Xiao Luan. Qin Xian still liked Xiao Luan, but this affection was buried deep in his heart. Before he had enough strength, Qin Xian wouldn't reveal this love. Of course, in the future, Qin Xian would still silently protect Xiao Luan. Only when Qin Xian felt that he had enough strength would he confess to Xiao Luan again. After thinking it through, Qin Xian and Xiao Luan seemed to have returned to the time when they first met. They were much more relaxed when they talked. 2 hours wasn't a long time. Very quickly, Zhang Xian had completely recovered. Lin Qing took the opportunity to announce the start of the next match. Xiao Luan vs. Zhang Xian. This was the final match to determine the first place in the recruitment competition. If Zhang Xian could defeat Xiao Luan, then he would undoubtedly be the first place in this recruitment competition. As the two of them walked onto the stage, many of the surrounding sword sect disciples cast unfriendly gazes at Zhang Xian. He could clearly feel the warning in their gazes. It was as if they were saying, "Brat, be careful. If you dare to harm even a single hair on Xiao Luan's head, our senior brothers will teach you a lesson." Most of the senior disciples in the sword sect knew Xiao Luan, so they naturally paid close attention to Xiao Luan's match. Moreover, because Zhang Xian was ruthless when he attacked Qin Xian, they immediately glared at Zhang Xian as a warning. Zhang Xian was puzzled. Why did so many senior disciples suddenly look at him with such hostility? Naturally, Zhang Xian didn't know that it was all because of Xiao Luan. However, under such gazes, Zhang Xian felt very uncomfortable. Forcefully suppressing the nervousness in his heart, Zhang Xian looked at Xiao Luan and revealed a smile. "Beauty, we meet again." Hearing Zhang Xian's words, Xiao Luan didn't reply. On the stage, Nangong Guan also smiled at Xiao Chen. "Junior brother, this brat has guts. He actually dared to take liberties with Luan Luan." Hearing Nangong Guan's words, Xiao Chen smiled and said, "It's a waste if one isn't frivolous. This Zhang Xian is a good seedling, but his temperament still needs to be tempered." With his current status, Xiao Chen naturally wouldn't bicker with a junior like Zhang Xian. Moreover, Zhang Xian's talent was indeed not bad. At the very least, among the new disciples recruited this time, he was definitely one of the best. The only flaw was Zhang Xian's personality and his narrow-mindedness. However, this wasn't a big problem. With more tempering in the future, it wasn't impossible for him to become a talent. Seeing that Xiao Chen didn't show any signs of anger, Nangong Guan smiled and didn't say anything else. She turned her head to look at the two people on the stage, waiting for the final result. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 2234. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Lin Qing announced the start of the competition. Zhang Xian took the initiative to attack. Although Xiao Luan was a woman, and a great beauty at that, Zhang Xian was determined to get first place in this recruitment competition. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Lin Qing announced the start of the competition. Zhang Xian took the initiative to attack. Although Xiao Luan was a woman, and a great beauty at that, Zhang Xian was determined to get first place in this recruitment competition. Zhang Xian naturally wouldn't give up so easily if he could obtain first place. Furthermore, Zhang Xian didn't show any mercy and used his full strength. He threw out a punch. Seeing this, Xiao Luan didn't dare to be careless. She drew out her longsword from her spatial ring and slashed out, colliding with Zhang Xian's fist. In a head-on collision, neither of them had the upper hand. Zhang Xian was also surprised by Xiao Luan's strength. She wasn't any weaker than him. Feeling Xiao Luan's strength, Zhang Xian didn't dare to be careless. He drew out his long sword and a dense sword aura revolved around him. Xiao Luan immediately used her sword domain. Sensing Zhang Xian's sword domain, Xiao Luan smiled. Sword domain? I can use it too. As she spoke, Xiao Luan also released her sword domain. Their sword domains overlapped and collided with each other. The sharp sword aura clashed in the air. Their feet moved at the same time and they attacked at almost the same time. Both of their sword techniques were extremely exquisite. It was hard to determine the victor in the fierce battle. As the battle continued, Zhang Xian didn't dare to underestimate Xiao Luan anymore. The pressure was great. Both Xiao Luan and Zhang Xian were under a lot of pressure. Seeing that it was hard to determine the victor, the surrounding sword sect's disciples all looked at Zhang Xian. There were even some disciples who were discussing softly. Senior brother, this brat doesn't know what's good for him. I think we should teach him a lesson. That's right. He doesn't even give face to Luan Luan. He's courting death. Humph, there are always some people in this world who don't know what's good for them. Don't worry, once he joins the sword sect, I'll let him know what rules are. The numerous disciples of the sword sect were naturally biased towards Xiao Luan. Moreover, in their opinion, Zhang Xian had already firmly entered the top 3 and was even confirmed to be the second. Yet, he was actually recklessly trying to compete with Xiao Luan for the first position. Wasn't he just looking for trouble? Who was Xiao Luan? She was Xiao Chen's daughter. How could a mere Zhang Xian compete with Xiao Luan for first place? Many of the senior disciples of the sword sect naturally wouldn't agree. From the gazes of the surrounding sword sect disciples, more and more anger and killing intent gathered on Zhang Xian's body. On the other hand, Zhang Xian, who was in an intense battle with Xiao Luan, quickly sensed the extremely dense rage. What's going on? Who did he offend? He couldn't help but be distracted. After some observation, Zhang Xian quickly discovered that the unkind gazes actually came from the senior disciples of the sword sect. At this moment, the senior disciples were looking at him with cold expressions. Aside from anger, their eyes were also filled with warning. Humph, kid, you better be sensible. Otherwise, I'll let you know why the flowers are so red. Many senior disciples narrowed their eyes as they stared at Zhang Xian. The warning in their eyes was self-evident. Toward this, Zhang Xian was truly bewildered. This was supposed to be a proper duel. Just who in the world had he offended? Why are these senior disciples looking at me as if they're looking at an enemy? He had never offended the disciples of the sword sect. What kind of public anger did he cause? While he was puzzled, Xiao Luan's calm voice sounded in Zhang Xian's ears. You dare to be distracted in the middle of a battle? Are you looking down on me? As he spoke, Xiao Luan had already sent out a palm strike. Zhang Xian, who was distracted, simply couldn't react in time and was directly sent flying by Xiao Luan's palm strike. Xiao Luan successfully sent Zhang Xian flying. The surrounding senior disciples immediately clapped their hands and cheered. Some even whistled. Anyone could tell that these senior disciples supported Xiao Luan. Xiao Luan had gained the upper hand, which made these senior disciples extremely excited. However, when Zhang Xian and Xiao Luan were locked in battle again, these senior disciples would coldly stare at Zhang Xian as if they wanted to skin him alive. Just like this, every time Xiao Luan gained the upper hand, the disciples of the sword sect would clap their hands and cheer. Every time Zhang Xian fought fiercely with Xiao Luan and was evenly matched, the disciples of the sword sect would give him another warning look. This made Zhang Xian unable to concentrate on the battle. His heart was constantly in a mess as he was afraid that these senior disciples would be unhappy with him. This kind of battle was simply torture for Zhang Xian. He couldn't use his full strength at all. Therefore, after the two of them exchanged blows for less than 10 minutes, Zhang Xian directly cried out, I admit defeat. I'm not fighting anymore. Zhang Xian could not help but grumble in his heart, what the hell is this? These senior disciples of Swords Gate, are they all crazy? They are all staring at me like a bunch of angry women. How am I supposed to fight now? Zhang Xian took the initiative to admit defeat. In response, the many senior disciples in the first round cheered. They were extremely happy that Xiao Luan had obtained first place. At the same time, their gazes towards Zhang Xian had become much friendlier. There were even some who softly laughed. Not bad, not bad. The child is teachable. Zhang Xian cursed in his heart when he noticed the change in attitude of the senior disciples. What the hell is going on? Is it right for me to admit defeat? Zhang Xian didn't know that in the eyes of the senior disciples, it was indeed right for Zhang Xian to admit defeat. Because no matter how strong you were, since you encountered Xiao Luan, you should take the initiative to admit defeat. After Zhang Xian admitted defeat, the next battle was between Xiao Luan and Qin Xian. Qin Xian originally had time to rest, but when he saw Zhang Xian on the stage, he revealed a bitter smile and said without hesitation, I admit defeat. Qin Xian didn't even enter the stage before admitting defeat. In this way, the first place of the recruitment competition fell to Xiao Luan. Zhang Xian cursed in his heart and jumped off the stage. When he passed by Qin Xian, he said with an unhappy expression, What the hell is going on? I'm first just like that? Zhang Xian still couldn't figure it out. In response, Qin Xian only smiled and didn't say anything. Qin Xian naturally knew the reason behind this. It was also because of Zhang Xian. If he really defeated Xiao Luan, then his future in the sword sect wouldn't be good. The senior disciples definitely wouldn't let him off so easily. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 2235. With Zhang Xian's and Qin Xian's victories, Xiao Luan finally won first place in the sword sect's recruitment competition. Many people present were very satisfied with this result. Only Zhang Xian was complaining in his heart. However, Zhang Xian knew that Xiao Luan's strength wasn't weak. Even if it was a fair fight, Zhang Xian didn't have much confidence in winning. Therefore, even if he lost the competition in such a manner, Zhang Xian wasn't too dissatisfied. At most, he felt a little sullen. The 3 rounds of the competition had ended, and the Swords Gate's recruitment had also come to an end. Young cultivators like Zhang Xian, Qin Xian, and the others who had passed the first 2 rounds had all successfully entered the Swords Gate. There were specialized people in charge of the following matters. Xiao Chun, Nangong Guan, and the other vice sect masters said a few words of encouragement and quickly left. On the way back to his residence, Xiao Chen didn't pay much attention to today's competition. After all, with Xiao Chen's current status, he wasn't interested in these children's battles. Even Xiao Luan's final ranking, Xiao Chen didn't care much about it. The end of the recruitment competition added a lot of new blood to the sword sect. With these people joining the sword sect became more lively. At the same time, Xiao Luan also expressed his wish to Xiao Chen that night. He wanted to become an outer disciple of the sword sect. Xiao Luan wanted to start from the bottom and become an outer disciple. Regarding this, Qin Shuru and the other girls naturally disagreed. However, Xiao Chen was very much in favor of this. In the end, Qin Shuru and the other girls couldn't persuade Xiao Luan and could only agree to his request. Just like this, Xiao Luan became an ordinary outer disciple of the sword sect. Of course, Xiao Luan's identity was known by many senior disciples in the sword sect. Obviously, it was impossible to hide his identity. After becoming an outer court disciple, Xiao Luan's identity was exposed in just 3 days. Knowing that Xiao Luan was actually Xiao Chen's daughter, Zhang Xian bitterly smiled. No wonder those old disciples were like that during the competition. However, Xiao Luan didn't do anything special about his identity being exposed. He was still like an ordinary outer disciple. He didn't bully others because of his special identity. The sword sect was thriving. At the same time, something big happened in Dragon Palace. After killing Long Yuan, Long Mie successfully took control of the Dragon Palace. Soon, he eliminated the voices of opposition in the Dragon Palace. Seeing that he had finally gained complete control of the Dragon Palace's annihilation, he could not help but feel excited. As the Palace Master of Dragon Palace, Long Mie had been dreaming about this day for a long time. Now, Long Mie truly felt what it meant to be in power. The pleasure that power brought him made him indulge in it and unable to extricate himself. However, this feeling didn't last long. On this day, Tao Ming took Yang Chen to find Long Mie. In Long Mie's cave mansion, Long Mie, who was sitting in the garden, saw Tao Ming take the initiative to come. He smiled and said, "Ancestor, what's the matter?" Tao Ming was now the ancestor of Dragon Palace. However, during this period of time, Tao Ming had been living in seclusion and didn't care about the affairs of Dragon Palace. Therefore, Long Mie had almost forgotten about him. Long Mie was indeed careless, or perhaps foolish. He didn't even have the slightest bit of vigilance against Tao Ming. He had never thought that Tao Ming would attack him. Seeing Tao Ming's arrival, Long Mie was still smiling. Looking at such a foolish Long Mie, Tao Ming also smiled and said, "Palace Master is indeed a genius. I have a whole new level of respect for you since you cleared the Dragon Palace so quickly." "Haha, Ancestor, you are too polite. I have been the Palace Master of Dragon Palace for so many years. If I couldn't even do this, I would be a laughing stock." Hearing this, Long Mie smiled proudly. Tao Ming really admired Long Mie's stupidity from the bottom of his heart. How could a person be so stupid? He was simply a weirdo. Even now that Tao Ming had come personally, Long Mie didn't even realize that something was wrong. Tao Ming also said with a smile, "Indeed. In this case, please give up your position, Palace Master." Tao Ming said bluntly. Only then did Long Mie realize that something was wrong. He looked at Tao Ming with a hint of fear in his eyes and asked coldly, "Ancestor, what do you mean?" "Nothing, but I want to re-establish Heavenly Sect. In this way, the position of Sect Master can only belong to my disciple, Yang Chen." Hearing this, Tao Ming said with a smile, "Re-establish Heavenly Sect?" Even if Long Mie was stupid, he knew what Tao Ming meant. Anger flashed in his eyes and he said coldly, "Tao Ming, don't forget that if it weren't for me, you would have been killed by the Sword Sect. We had an agreement back then." "That's right. But you said it yourself. That was back then. The situation is different now." Tao Ming didn't care about Long Mie's angry shout and smiled slightly. When they were forced to a dead end by the Sword Sect, Long Mia happened to propose an alliance. Tao Ming and Yang Chun agreed after thinking about it. But now, with the fall of Long Yuan, there was no one in Dragon Palace who could keep Tao Ming in check. As a result, the previous agreement naturally had no binding force. What a joke. The so-called agreement required both sides to have similar strength. If one side was too strong or the other side was too weak, the agreement was basically fragile. Just like now, no one in Dragon Palace could keep Tao Ming in check. So, what Tao Ming wanted to do was entirely up to him. Now that Long Mia had completely wiped out Dragon Palace, his role was completely gone. It was normal for Tao Ming to replace him. Hearing Tao Ming's words and seeing Tao Ming walking towards him step by step, Long Mia finally realized the seriousness of the problem. When he joined forces with Tao Ming to kill Long Yuan, it was actually leading the wolf into the house. Now, the wolf finally showed its ferocity. Unfortunately, Long Mia had no means to contend with Tao Ming. Looking at Long Mia's horrified eyes and expression, Tao Ming said faintly, "Learn to be smarter in your next life. That old man Long Yuan is right about one thing. You are indeed too stupid. Remember, any form of cooperation requires a bargaining chip, and now, you have no bargaining chip in your hand." With that, Tao Ming pointed his finger and Long Mia died on the spot. Chapter 2236. Long Mia, who was only at the End Realm, naturally wasn't Tao Ming's match. After Long Mia spent so much effort to stabilize the Dragon Palace, he was destined to die. Long Mia, who was only at the End Realm, naturally wasn't Tao Ming's match. After Long Mia spent so much effort to stabilize the Dragon Palace, he was destined to die. Long Mia didn't even think about it. From the start, Tao Ming never thought about working with him. Everything was just for the Dragon Palace. Now that Long Mia no longer had any value, Tao Ming naturally wouldn't keep him alive. His eyes were filled with unwillingness and regret. But in the end, Long Mia still fell straight down, his aura dissipating. Long Mia died. Looking at his corpse, Yang Chen laughed in disdain. What an idiot. From Yang Chen's point of view, Long Mia was indeed an idiot, a complete idiot. He actually thought that Tao Ming was really cooperating with him. Therefore, from the beginning to the end, he did not take any precautions against Tao Ming, Yang Chen, and the experts of the Heavenly Coiling sect. People like Long Mia didn't die unjustly. If even an idiot like him wasn't, then there was no justice. Hearing Yang Chen's words, Tao Ming, who was standing by the side, chuckled softly. This guy's death is indeed not to be regretted. It's a pity that the old man, Long Yuan, misjudged him. He actually let such an idiot become the palace master of Dragon Palace and ruined the legacy of Dragon Palace for 10,000 years. As he said that, Tao Ming looked at Yang Chen. His smile grew wider. "Chen, I'll leave the rest to you. Don't be like this idiot." Long Mia was already killed. The next step was to control the entire Dragon Palace. Yang Chen said confidently, "Master, don't worry. I won't disappoint you." Long Mia was dead. The experts of the Heavenly Sect didn't suffer any casualties in the battle with the Sword Sect. They all followed Tao Ming to the Dragon Palace. Now that he had the help of the experts of the Heavenly Sect, Yang Chen was naturally confident in controlling the Dragon Palace. Moreover, during this period of time, Yang Chen was not idle. He had secretly contacted many high-level members of Dragon Palace. As the saying goes, once a person begins to degenerate, his bottom line will be lowered again and again. These higher-ups of Dragon Palace had betrayed Dragon Abyss before, so it was not impossible for them to accompany Long Mia now. As for the inheritance of the Dragon Palace, was it still important to them? Since they were already traitors, they probably didn't care about the survival of the Dragon Palace. Therefore, under Yang Chen's coercion, more than half of the high-level members of Dragon Palace had already secretly submitted to Tao Ming and Heavenly Sect. As such, with the help of these people and Long Mie's vigorous reforms during this period, it was not difficult for Yang Chun to control the Dragon Palace. On that day, the entire Dragon Palace was once again filled with bloodshed. First, the news of Long Mie's death spread. Then, Yang Chen re-established the heavenly sect, and he was still the sect master. With the Dragon Palace as the foundation, he re-established the heavenly sect. As for the Dragon Palace, it was immediately announced that it had perished. He thought that such a thing would cause many people in the Dragon Palace to oppose, or even try to stop it, but in fact it was completed smoothly. No one tried to stop them. Or rather, those who tried to stop them were killed by the experts of the heavenly sect in the first place. It was completely natural, and there was almost no resistance. Yang Chun took over the Dragon Palace and re-established the heavenly sect with the Dragon Palace as the foundation. With the establishment of the heavenly sect, the Dragon Palace was obviously declared to be perished. The Dragon Palace, which had stood tall in the great thousand world for tens of thousands of years, was destroyed in the hands of a fool. If it were not for Long Mie's jealousy, the heavenly sect would not have destroyed the Dragon Palace, and it was not certain whether Tao Ming and the others were still alive. After all, the Sword Sect would not let the heavenly sect go. Unfortunately, everything was forgotten, and the fool Long Mie had been killed long ago. Tao Ming and Yang Chen's sudden rise in revolt, taking control of the Dragon Palace, and re-establishing the heavenly sect naturally could not be hidden. Soon, the other Lingtian sects in the Great Thousand World also received the news. However, no one was surprised by such an outcome. For example, Dao Ju did not show any shock after hearing about what happened to the Dragon Palace. He only said with some regret, "The Dragon Palace, which had stood tall for tens of thousands of years, was destroyed in the hands of a fool. How sad and funny." Dao Ju had guessed Tao Ming's wild ambition from the start. Or rather, other than Long Mie, everyone else could see Tao Ming's wild ambition. After all, this was not a difficult matter. Even if one used their toes to think, they would know that an end-realm cultivator like Tao Ming had no reason to cooperate with him. If it were not for other motives, would Tao Ming have agreed to Long Mie's request? What was laughable was that Long Mie actually thought that Tao Ming only needed to be an old ancestor. Tao Ming was indeed only an old ancestor. However, Tao Ming did not want to be the old ancestor of the Dragon Palace, but the old ancestor of the heavenly sect. The Dragon Palace, which had stood tall in the Great Thousand World for tens of thousands of years, was once glorious and powerful. Just like that, it withdrew from the stage of history in the most humiliating way and was completely destroyed. Dao Ju lamented the destruction of the Dragon Palace. In the Sword Sect, Xiao Chen also received the news from the Dragon Palace. Xiao Chen was not surprised by this. Like Dao Ju, Xiao Chen had already guessed that this would be the end result. How could that fool Long Mie go against Tao Ming and his disciple? Xiao Chen sighed softly and lamented. No matter how powerful a sect is, sometimes all it takes is one idiot to bring it to a point of no return. Upon hearing Xiao Chen's words, Nangong Guan, Zhou Song, and Wu Huan nodded in agreement. Indeed, the Dragon Palace was strong enough, but because of that fool Long Mie, the Dragon Palace was directly pushed into the abyss of eternal damnation. I wonder what the ancestors of the Dragon Palace would feel if they were in heaven to see it being destroyed in such a humiliating way. Nangong Guan also sighed. The destruction of the Dragon Palace was already a fact, and no one could save it now. The Sword Sect was now faced with how to deal with the re-established Heavenly Sect. With the enmity between the two sides, if Tao Ming and Yang Chen did not die, they would not let the Sword Sect go. Similarly, Xiao Chen and the Sword Sect would not let the Heavenly Sect go. Therefore, the battle between the two sides was still not over. However, one thing was certain, and that was that there was no fool like Long Mie in the Sword Sect. With a cold look in his eyes, Xiao Chun looked at the distant dragon palace. Oh no, it should be the direction of the heavenly sect, and said in a cold voice, Heavenly sect, if I can destroy you once, I can destroy you a second time. This time, I will not give you any chance. Please add, please vote, please recommend. Sword Master 8 Desolation chapters will continue to be updated in the hand fighting bar. There are no advertisements in the website. Please add and recommend the hand fighting bar. If you like Sword Master 8 Desolation, please add Sword Master 8 Desolation. Chapter 2237. The Dragon Palace was taken over by Tao Ming and Yang Chen. Xiao Chen had already expected such an outcome. After all, how could that trash Long Nie suppress Tao Ming and Yang Chen? Now that the Dragon Palace was destroyed and the Hetian sect was established once more, Xiao Chen wasn't too surprised, as this was an expected outcome. When Xiao Chen received the news of the Dragon Palace being destroyed, Long Qing, who was also in the Sword Sect, and the two End Realm experts that Xiao Chen brought back also heard the news. After knowing that the Dragon Palace was really destroyed, the three of them were devastated, especially the two End Realm experts. They had been in the Dragon Palace their entire lives, but in the end, they could only watch as it was destroyed and couldn't do anything. They hated Long Mie to the extreme. If it wasn't for him, the Dragon Palace wouldn't have fallen to such a state. It was Long Mie's own stupidity that destroyed the entire Dragon Palace. Long Mie was indeed stupid and his death wasn't regrettable. However, the destruction of the Dragon Palace made the three of them feel bad. After thinking for a long time, Long Qing suddenly said, Join the Sword Sect. Only the Sword Sect can help us take revenge. The Dragon Palace was already gone. After thinking for a long time, Long Qing decided to join the Sword Sect. Of course, this was mainly for the two of them. After all, with the relationship between Long Qing and Xiao Chen, it didn't make much of a difference whether they joined the Sword Sect or not. As for the two Dragon Palace elders, although they had always been in the Sword Sect, they weren't from the Sword Sect. Xiao Chen only allowed them to stay in the Sword Sect because of Long Qing. Now that the Dragon Palace was destroyed, they, who were once experts of the Dragon Palace, naturally became rootless duckweeds. Moreover, the best way to take revenge was to join the Sword Sect and help the Sword Sect destroy the Hetian sect. This would be considered taking revenge for the Dragon Palace. Hearing Long Qing's words, the two of them were stunned. However, they didn't immediately agree, but they also didn't have much objection. The two of them didn't have much resistance to joining the Sword Sect. However, because they had been part of the Dragon Palace for most of their lives, it was hard for them to suddenly change. Long Qing did not rush the two of them when he saw them fall into silence. He waited quietly at the side. After a long while, the two of them looked at each other and then looked at Long Qing and said, We'll listen to you. Both of them respected Long Qing very much. After all, Long Qing was the dragon girl of the Dragon Palace. Their loyalty to the Dragon Palace had long been engraved in their bones. Therefore, in their eyes, Long Qing was now their backbone. The two of them agreed to join the Sword Sect, but it still depended on Xiao Chen's opinion. The next day, Long Qing led the three of them to Xiao Chen's residence. Seeing Long Qing, Xiao Chen took the initiative to call out, Second sister. The destruction of the Dragon Palace must have been a big blow to Long Qing. Xiao Chen wanted to comfort her, but before Xiao Chen could speak, Long Qing smiled and interrupted, Little brother, don't worry. I'm not that weak. Today I have something to discuss with you. Hearing Long Qing's words, Xiao Chen swallowed the words at the tip of his tongue. Then, he looked at Long Qing and asked, Second sister, just say what you want to say. Xiao Chen and Long Qing didn't need to be polite. Hearing this, Long Qing explained the matter briefly. According to Long Qing, the Dragon Palace was still destroyed. The experts of the Dragon Palace, who were rescued by Xiao Chen, had no home to return to. Therefore, they wanted to join the Sword Sect and become members of the Sword Sect. Hearing Long Qing's words, Xiao Chen naturally wouldn't refuse. The strength of the Sword Sect would definitely be greatly improved if these experts of the Dragon Palace joined the Sword Sect. There was no doubt about this. Moreover, these experts of the Dragon Palace hoped that the Sword Sect would take revenge for the Dragon Palace. However, such a request was nothing to Xiao Chen. This was because even without them, the Sword Sect and Hetian Sect would have a battle sooner or later. Xiao Chen definitely wouldn't let Tao Ming, Yang Chen, and the others off. Without any hesitation, he nodded and agreed. These two End-Realm experts of the Dragon Palace directly became the deputy sect masters of the Sword Sect. With two more End-Realm experts, the strength of the Sword Sect naturally increased. In the past, the number of End-Realm Almighties in Swords Sect might not be comparable to the other Lingtian sects. However, now, the number of End-Realm Almighties in Swords Sect was no weaker than any of the other Lingtian sects. Their strength had increased greatly once again. This made Xiao Chen extremely happy. Everyone of the Dragon Palace joined the Sword Sect, causing the strength of the Sword Sect to increase greatly. In the following period of time, the Hetian Sect didn't do anything special. The Sword Sect temporarily didn't have the time to deal with the Hetian Sect. In addition, the other Lingtian sects also stopped fighting. For a time, the vast thousand worlds seemed to have returned to peace. Under such peace, Xiao Chen cultivated diligently every day. Half a year passed in the blink of an eye. Within this half a year, Xiao Chen's cultivation naturally broke through to the small perfection Dao realm. After breaking through, Xiao Chen's strength obviously increased again. However, what made Xiao Chen the happiest wasn't the increase in his cultivation, but the fact that Qin Shuru and Baihua Fairy were both pregnant. That's right, the fact that the two women were pregnant at the same time was the happiest thing for Xiao Chen's family. Every day, other than cultivating and dealing with some Sword Sect affairs, Xiao Chen accompanied the women, especially Qin Shuru and Baihua Fairy, who were now the treasures of the entire Xiao family. Bai Ruiue stayed by Qin Shuru and Baihua Fairy's side almost all day long. After a day of cultivation, Xiao Chen, Qin Shuru, and Baihua Fairy sat in the pavilion in the courtyard. Looking at the two women's gradually bulging bellies, Xiao Chen couldn't help but smile. "What are you smiling about?" Baihua Fairy rolled her eyes at Xiao Chen when she saw him smiling foolishly. Hearing Baihua Fairy's words, Xiao Chen smiled and replied, "I'm just happy that the two of you have done well." Although Xiao Chen already had a daughter, Xiao Luan's identity was very special. She was the world spirit of the Eight Desolates world and wasn't Xiao Chen's biological child. Now, Qin Shuru and Baihua Fairy's children were his own. However, Xiao Chen didn't look down on Xiao Luan just because his children were about to be born. After so many years of being by her side, Xiao Chen had long treated Xiao Luan as his own daughter. At the same time, Xiao Luan was also very curious about her brother and sister who were about to be born. At the same time, she was also looking forward to it. Recently, whenever she had time, Xiao Luan would run back and say that she wanted to see her unborn brother and sister. When he heard that Xiao Luan had won first place in the outer sect competition, Xiao Chen laughed and scolded her. "You little girl, I don't even need to think to know that you won first place in the outer sect because everyone let you win, right?" "Who said so? I really won first place with my own strength. If you don't believe me, father, you can ask the deacon of the outer court." Xiao Luan refused to let it go. In fact, Xiao Chen was very clear about Xiao Luan's strength. With her extremely high cultivation talent, Xiao Luan only needed to put in a little effort to achieve unimaginable progress. This was the difference. Moreover, with Xiao Luan's strength, she was indeed one of the best in the outer court. She liked it when Xiao Chen praised her. Thus, she couldn't resist Xiao Luan's coaxing and pestering. In the end, Xiao Chen smiled and said, "Okay, okay, okay. My Luan is the best, okay?" Every time Xiao Chen performed, Xiao Luan would be very happy. When the family was together, they seemed to be very happy. This was what Xiao Chen had been looking for all along. After struggling in the Great Thousand World for so many years, Xiao Chen could finally say that he had the ability to protect his family. Time passed day by day, and in the blink of an eye, a few months had passed. As time passed, Qin Shuru and 100-Flower Fairy's bellies grew bigger and bigger. Soon, it was time for them to give birth. Strangely enough, Qin Shuru and 100-Flower Fairy were pregnant almost at the same time. Now, they were giving birth at the same time. On this day, in Xiao Chen's cave residence, Xiao Chen, Long Qing, Nangong Guan, Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and the other higher-ups of the sword sect gathered together. In the courtyard, Xiao Chen was nervously pacing back and forth. The reason why Xiao Chen was so nervous was naturally because Qin Shuru and 100-Flower Fairy were giving birth. He couldn't help but worry. Seeing Xiao Chen like this, Nangong Guan smiled and said, "Junior brother, you've been pacing back and forth for almost an hour. Don't worry, it'll be fine." Qin Shuru and 100-Flower Fairy were both martial artists. Logically speaking, they shouldn't be in any danger. After all, martial artists' physiques were far superior to ordinary people. There shouldn't be any difficulties in giving birth and dying. But even though he knew this, Xiao Chen couldn't help but worry. Perhaps this was how a husband and father felt. Hearing Nangong Guan's words, Xiao Chen smiled bitterly and said, "Senior brother, Sigh, how can I not worry? It's been almost 4 hours. It had indeed been almost 4 hours since Qin Shuru and 100-Flower Fairy had started giving birth. How could Xiao Chen not worry? Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Nangong Guan smiled bitterly and didn't say anything. As a father, Nangong Guan naturally understood Xiao Chen's feelings. Xiao Chen had never felt that time was passing so slowly. Chapter 2239. Looking at the two chubby boys lying beside Qin Shuru and Fairy of 100 Flowers, Xiao Chen couldn't help but smile. However, Qin Shuru and Fairy of 100 Flowers also needed to rest, so Xiao Chen didn't stay for too long. After comforting the two girls, he quickly left the room. After all, Qin Yao, Tian Yu, Gu Lingyao, and Hong Xiu were taking care of him. There was no need for Xiao Chen here. When Xiao Chen returned to the courtyard, Nangong Guan and the others, as well as Long Qing, all smiled and said, "Congratulations, Sect Master, for having a son." Qin Shuru and Fairy of 100 Flowers had both given birth to two chubby boys for him. This made Xiao Chen very happy, so when he heard everyone's congratulations, Xiao Chen laughed heartily. After laughing, Xiao Chen directly invited everyone to drink to their heart's content. When they arrived at another courtyard in the cave residence, everyone sat together, drinking and chatting. As they chatted, Long Qing looked at Xiao Chen and said, "Little brother, have you thought of names?" Of course, Xiao Chen had already thought of names for the two chubby boys of Qin Shuru and Fairy of 100 Flowers. In response to Long Qing's question, Xiao Chen smiled faintly and said, "Haha, let's call them Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao. The older one would be called Xiao Yao, while the younger one would be called Xiao Lao." Hearing this, Long Qing nodded slightly. Then, Xiao Chen smiled mysteriously at Long Qing. "Second sister, I plan to have these two boys become apprentices to you and Big Brother. What do you think?" Long Qing and Xianyuan Ling were Xiao Chen's sworn siblings. Logically speaking, the two of them were Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao's godfather and godmother. However, Xiao Chen had the intention to have the two boys become apprentices to the two of them. Long Qing didn't object to this and readily nodded in agreement. Thus, Xiao Chen decided to have Xiao Lao become Long Qing's apprentice and Xiao Yao become Xianyuan Ling's apprentice. However, Xianyuan Ling wasn't in the sword sect right now, so they could only wait for him to return. Shao Chen was overjoyed at the birth of his children. Everyone drank to their heart's content. Until the next day. The birth of Xiao Yao and Xiao Luo, to the entire Swords Gate, was a joyous occasion. And these two little guys, to put it bluntly, they were indeed born with a golden spoon in their mouth. From the moment they were born, they were destined to have a noble status. As their father, Shao Chen gave these two boys a perfect family and background. At least in the Great Thousand World, Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao could be said to be the top princes. Thinking about it, how many people in the Great Thousand World could be compared to the princes of the Sword Sect? These two boys were indeed very fortunate. Not only did their family background defy the heavens, but Shao Chen's family also doted on these two boys. This was especially so for the two elders, Shao Qing and Bai Ruiyue. They were afraid that they would melt in their mouths and fall out of their hand. In addition, Gu Lingyao, Tian Yu, and Hong Xiu also treated these two boys as their own. After so many years of getting along, the relationship between these girls had long been like that of sisters. Therefore, Qin Shuru and Fairy of 100 Flowers' children naturally treated them like their own children. They were doted on by everyone. This was the result of their father, Shao Chen's hard work. With the company of his sons and the Great Thousand Worlds' temporary peace, Shao Chen naturally enjoyed a few rare years of familial happiness. The matters of the Sword Sect developed in an orderly manner. The system of martial arts academies in the Sword Mansion was also gradually established. 5 years passed in the blink of an eye. At this time, within the Sword Mansion, almost every city had a martial arts academy. These martial arts academies would recruit a batch of students every year. There was no need for expensive tuition fees. In fact, even ordinary people could afford it. Of course, these martial arts academies only taught the basics of cultivation. However, even so, it was enough to make many ordinary people who had no cultivation extremely excited. At the very least, they now had the possibility of stepping into the martial path and becoming a martial artist. Shao Chen's dream was for everyone to be able to cultivate. He didn't ask for their cultivation to be high, but at least they could prolong their lives and strengthen their bodies. After 5 years of hard work, this goal seemed to be slowly being achieved, at least within the Sword Mansion. Moreover, in these 5 years, Xiao Yao and Xiao Luo had also slowly grown up. Although they were not yet at the age of cultivation, because they had all kinds of spiritual treasures of heaven and earth to strengthen their bodies since they were young, the physical quality of these two boys was already very good. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao's starting point was much higher than that of their father, Shao Chen. Almost from a young age, they started to enjoy the best cultivation environment and various treasures of heaven and earth. As for Shao Chen, in these 5 years, Shao Chen naturally wouldn't be idle. His cultivation had already reached the peak of the Dao realm. A month ago, Shao Chen also started to go into seclusion to try to break through to the End Realm. Shao Chen going into seclusion to try to break through to the End Realm was a huge matter for the Sword Sect. Moreover, in these 5 years of peace, the sect leaders of the 10 Lingtian sects like Xiao Xiao, Dao Ju, and Yang Chen were all on the verge of breaking through to the End Realm. Today, all the geniuses were about to break through to the End Realm.